And to my daughter Rebecca, I leave nothing. Not a penny, not a picture frame, not a memory. The lawyer read from my father's will, his voice emotionless. She knows why. My sister Vanessa sat across the mahogany table, her expression carefully, neutral despite the inheritance of our family's entire estate worth millions. I maintained my composure while my mind raced with one thought. This betrayal will not define me. I can still replay that moment with perfect clarity. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you, the tastefully appointed conference room at Palmer and Whitley Law Offices. The gleaming table, where family legacies were divided or destroyed with the reading of a few carefully chosen words. What should have been a somber gathering to honor my father's memory had become my public humiliation. Attorney Palmer continued reading the document, each word another strike. The family home at Lakeview Heights, all financial accounts, the vacation property in Aspen, and full ownership of Hartford Pharmaceuticals shall pass to my daughter Vanessa, who has always understood the meaning of family loyalty. Vanessa dabbed at non-existent tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. Our father's longtime assistant Margaret stared at her lap, unable to meet my eyes. Cousin Drew shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The family lawyer himself seemed embarrassed by the vindictiveness being expressed through his measured tone. "Ms. Rebecca, would you care to sign the acknowledgement form?" Palmer asked, sliding a document across the polished surface. I reached for the pen with steady fingers, my law degree and years in corporate negotiations serving me well in this moment when I most needed to appear unaffected. The acknowledgement merely confirmed I'd been present for the reading. It didn't mean I accepted the outcome. "Of course," I replied, my voice surprisingly level. I signed my name with the same confident stroke I'd used on countless business deals, court filings, and the checks that had supported our father through his illness when Vanessa had been too busy to visit. 15 years of dedication to the family business. 15 years of expanding Hartford Pharmaceuticals from a struggling regional supplier into an international leader in medical research. 15 years of missed vacations, postponed relationships, and personal sacrifices, all while watching Vanessa drop in and out of university programs, fail at 3 different careers, and receive endless financial bailouts from our father. And this was my reward. "If there are no questions about the terms, that concludes our business today," Palmer announced, closing the leather portfolio that contained the document that had just stripped away my life's work. Vanessa rose first, smoothing her designer dress. "Rebecca, I hope you understand this was Dad's decision. I'm sure we can work something out regarding your situation." Her voice dripped with the same false concern she'd perfected over years of manipulating our father. "My situation is just fine," I replied, gathering my belongings. "Congratulations on your inheritance." I maintained perfect poise as I walked through the law firm's elegant lobby, nodded to the receptionist, and stepped into the elevator. Only when the doors closed did I allow myself a moment, just one, to close my eyes and take a deep breath. I hadn't cried when my father told me I was throwing my life away by going to law school instead of marrying the son of his golf partner. I hadn't cried when he criticized my decision to join Hartford Pharmaceuticals as counsel instead of a more suitable position. I hadn't cried during the countless board meetings where he'd dismissed my strategic initiatives only to present them as his own ideas months later. And I wouldn't cry now. The elevator doors opened to the parking garage, and I walked to my car with measured steps. Behind the wheel of my sensibly expensive sedan, purchased with my own earnings, not family money, I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder I'd prepared weeks ago when my father's health had taken its final turn. Inside was a comprehensive analysis of Hartford Pharmaceuticals' ownership structure, potential legal challenges to the will, and 3 distinct strategy options I'd developed with my own attorney. I hadn't known exactly what my father would do, but I'd suspected it wouldn't be fair. He had never treated me and Vanessa equally, and terminal illness had only hardened his biases. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend and fellow attorney, Naomi. "How did it go?" I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I started the car and drove toward the office building where I'd spent countless hours transforming Hartford Pharmaceuticals from a company that sold generic medications into an innovative research powerhouse, specializing in rare disease treatments. The sleek glass tower reflected the afternoon sunlight, a monument to what dedicated leadership could accomplish. I'd started in the legal department 15 years ago, working my way up to chief legal officer before transitioning to chief operating officer 5 years back. Every employee, from the researchers in the labs to the administrative staff, respected my judgment and commitment. And now it all belonged to Vanessa, who couldn't distinguish between an antibody and an antacid. I parked in my reserved space, soon to be hers, I supposed, and took a moment to compose myself. The shock was fading, replaced by something cooler and more focused. Grief for my father would come later. Right now, I needed clarity. My executive assistant Priya looked up in surprise as I entered. "Rebecca, I thought you'd take the day off after." Her voice trailed off. "The will reading?" I finished for her. "Life goes on, and we have the West Ridge clinical trial results coming in tomorrow." "Of course," she nodded, concern lingering in her eyes. "Dr. Kaplan called twice about the FDA meeting next week." "I'll return his call shortly," I said, heading into my office and closing the door behind me. The space reflected my approach to business, elegant but functional, with awards and degrees discreetly displayed alongside photographs of our research team celebrating key milestones. A scale model of our new manufacturing facility, designed to my specifications and set to open next month, occupied a prominent place on the credenza. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and reviewed the company's financial reports. Hartford Pharmaceuticals had been worth approximately $5 million when I joined, a legacy business my grandfather had built, and my father had nearly run into the ground with his outdated approach to pharmaceutical development. The first year had been about stopping the bleeding, cutting unprofitable product lines, settling 2 lawsuits I'd inherited, and modernizing our regulatory compliance systems. The second year focused on rebuilding relationships with hospitals and research institutions that had been alienated by my father's rigid negotiation tactics. By year 3, I'd identified our opportunity: rare disease treatments with orphan drug potential. A challenging market with complex regulatory hurdles, but enormous potential for both profit and genuine social impact. My father had resisted the pivot. "We make standard generics, Rebecca. We always have. It's reliable." But the numbers told a different story, and I'd eventually convinced the board, though never fully my father, that transformation was necessary. The transition had been grueling, hiring specialized researchers, navigating complex FDA protocols, securing patients' advocacy partnerships. I'd worked 100-hour weeks, sleeping on the office couch during critical phases of drug applications. And it had paid off spectacularly. Our first orphan drug approval had led to others. Our research protocols had generated multiple patents. Revenue had increased 5-fold, reaching $80 million this quarter with projections to hit $100 million by year-end, all of which made today's will reading even more baffling. Vanessa knew nothing about pharmaceutical development, FDA regulations, clinical trials, or patient advocacy. She had never negotiated with hospital systems, developed research protocols, or managed a team larger than her 2 personal assistants. Placing her at the helm wasn't just an insult to me, it was an existential threat to the company itself and to the patients who depended on our medications. A knock at my office door interrupted my thoughts. Naomi entered without waiting for a response, closing the door behind her. "I take it from your silence that it went exactly as we feared," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. As both my friend and outside counsel, she was one of the few people who knew exactly what was at stake. "Worse," I replied, sliding the folder toward her. He left everything to Vanessa, the company, the family home, even his personal effects. And he included a lovely personal message about how I'm not worth a penny. Naomi's expression hardened as she flipped through the documents. Did Palmer have any explanation? None that he shared, but we both know my father made this decision months ago when I refused to abandon the Navarres trial. The Navarres trial, our groundbreaking research into a treatment for a rare neurological disorder, had been a point of intense conflict. My father had wanted to sell the patent to a larger pharmaceutical company for a quick profit. I had insisted on completing the research ourselves, believing the treatment could transform lives while establishing Hartford as a leader in the field. Punishing you by giving the company to Vanessa is like punishing a garden by putting a bulldozer in charge, Naomi observed. Despite everything, I almost smiled at the analogy. The question is, she continued, what are you going to do about it? It was the question I'd been asking myself since I first realized my father might actually follow through on his threats to disinherit me. But now, sitting in the office where I'd built something meaningful despite his constant undermining, the answer crystallized with perfect clarity. I'm going to fight, I said, not just for what should rightfully be mine, but for everything I've built here. The research that could help thousands, the teams that depend on knowledgeable leadership, the future of Hartford Pharmaceuticals. Naomi nodded, a slow smile spreading across her face. Good, because I've been doing some digging, and I found something interesting about your grandfather's original company charter that your father may have conveniently forgotten. As she pulled out a document from her own briefcase, I felt the first glimmer of hope. The battle for Hartford Pharmaceuticals had just begun, and unlike my father and sister, I came prepared for war. The morning after the will reading, I arrived at Hartford Pharmaceuticals headquarters at precisely 6:15 a.m., the same time I'd arrived nearly every day for the past 15 years. The security guard, Pete, looked surprised to see me. Ms. Hartford didn't expect you in today. After yesterday's, well, you know. News traveled fast. The security team had probably known about my disinheritance before I did. The Westridge trial doesn't pause for family drama, Pete, I replied with a smile that took effort to maintain. Those patients are counting on us. The elevator ride to the executive floor gave me a moment of solitude to collect my thoughts. As the doors opened to the 32nd floor, I surveyed what I'd built. The sleek Research Coordination Center with glass-walled offices, allowing researchers and executives to collaborate seamlessly. The digital displays showing real-time updates. From our 4 clinical trials, the wall of framed patents that had transformed Hartford from a generic manufacturer into a pioneer in rare disease treatment, none of which would exist without me. Dr. Farah Lynn, our chief medical officer, was already at her desk despite the early hour. She looked up as I passed, concern evident in her expression. Rebecca, she said, rising to intercept me. I just heard about the will. Everyone's talking about it. Is it true? Dr. Lynn had been my second major hire after joining Hartford, recruited from Johns Hopkins with the promise of building something that would change patients' lives. She'd been skeptical initially. Hartford had a reputation for bland generics and risk aversion under my father's leadership, but I'd convinced her of my vision. If you're asking whether my father left everything to Vanessa, including full ownership and control of Hartford Pharmaceuticals, then yes, it's true, I replied, continuing toward my office with Dr. Lynn falling into step beside me. That's insane, she said, lowering her voice as we passed the finance department where early risers were already at their desks. Your sister has zero scientific background. She thinks a peptide is some kind of energy drink. Despite everything, I almost smiled at the accuracy of the assessment. Vanessa had once attended a company presentation where I'd discussed our peptide synthesis breakthrough and had later asked if we could put it in bottles with a cool label to sell at gyms. The situation is what it is, I said, reaching my office. Right now, my priority is ensuring our current projects remain on track. Dr. Lin followed me inside, closing the door. Rebecca, this isn't just about ownership. The Novartis trial is at a critical phase. The Westridge results come in today. The FDA inspection for the new facility is next week. None of that can succeed without your leadership. She was right. The timing couldn't have been worse. We were weeks away from potentially groundbreaking announcements on multiple fronts, all of which required careful navigation of scientific, regulatory, and business considerations. Tell me about the Westridge numbers, I said, setting my bag down and moving to my computer. The early indicators were promising. Dr. Lin recognized my deflection but respected it enough to shift gears. Better than promising. The preliminary data suggests a 67% reduction in symptom severity compared to standard treatments. If the final analysis confirms it, we're looking at a treatment that could transform lives for thousands of patients. This was exactly what I'd envisioned when I'd pushed Hartford toward rare disease research 5 years ago. While other pharmaceutical companies chased blockbuster drugs for common conditions, we focused on overlooked diseases with smaller patient populations but desperate need. The orphan drug designations provided regulatory advantages, and the pricing structures ensured profitability despite smaller markets. It had been a calculated risk that many, including my father, had considered foolhardy. Now, it stood poised to establish Hartford as an industry leader in a specialized but lucrative sector. Send me the raw data as soon as it comes in, I instructed, turning to my computer. I want to review it before the team meeting. As Dr. Lin left, my assistant Priya appeared with my usual morning coffee and a concerned expression. The board members have been calling all morning, she said, placing the coffee on my desk. They want to know what happens next. The board, 7 members, most of them my father's longtime friends and business associates, people who had watched me grow up, who had seen me transform Hartford Pharmaceuticals, and who now faced the prospect of Vanessa taking control. Tell them I'll address their concerns at Thursday's scheduled meeting, I replied. There was no point in having the same conversation 7 separate times. Also, Priya added hesitantly, your sister called. She said to inform you she'll be coming in tomorrow to look around her company. The possessive phrasing was so typically Vanessa, already claiming ownership of something she hadn't built and didn't understand. Schedule her for 10 a.m., I said after a moment's consideration, and book the main conference room. The main one? Not your office? This will be an official transition discussion, not a private conversation, I explained, and ask the department heads to prepare one-page summaries of their current projects. As Priya left to make the arrangements, I turned to my computer and pulled up the company dashboard I'd designed to track our key metrics in real time. The numbers told the story of Hartford's transformation under my leadership. Annual revenue had grown from $18 million to $82 million. Research staff had expanded from 7 to 78 scientists across 3 specialized labs. Our patent portfolio had increased from 2 active patents to 23, with 11 more pending. Our stock price, though we remained privately held, had an estimated value 5 times higher than when I'd joined. Patient reach had grown from supplying generic medications to 420 hospitals, to providing specialized treatments to patients in 37 countries. And perhaps most importantly, our treatments now directly improved the lives of thousands of patients with rare conditions who previously had few or no options. All of this had been accomplished while maintaining ethical pricing models that ensured accessibility, another of my initiatives that my father had initially resisted, but that had ultimately enhanced our reputation and secured preferred relationships with major hospital systems. My phone buzzed with a text from Naomi. Found something interesting. Lunch today? Before I could respond, there was a knock at my door, and Devin Wright, our chief financial officer, entered looking distinctly uncomfortable. Rebecca, do you have a minute? Devon had been with Hartford for nearly 20 years, one of the few executives who predated my arrival. He'd been skeptical of many of my initial changes, but had become a steady supporter as the financial results proved my approach worked. Of course. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. I assume this is about the ownership transition? He nodded, settling into the chair with the cautious posture of someone approaching a difficult topic. The financial implications are significant. Your father's decision creates several immediate concerns, such as, for starters, the Hudson Memorial Hospital contract has a key person clause that specifically names you. If you're no longer in leadership, they can terminate the relationship with 30 days' notice. The Hudson contract represented approximately 8% of our current revenue. Not catastrophic if lost, but certainly significant. What else? I asked, making notes. The venture funding for the new research facility is contingent on the management team remaining stable. The VCs were explicit that their confidence is in your leadership. This was a more serious issue. The new facility was central to our expansion plans, particularly for the scaled production of the Novaris treatment if the clinical trials continued their promising trajectory. And most immediately, Devon continued, we have the investor call next week to discuss the quarterly results. They'll expect answers about the leadership transition. I nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Hartford wasn't just a family legacy or a personal achievement. It was an ecosystem of employees, patients, healthcare providers, and investors, all of whom had come to rely on steady, knowledgeable leadership. I'll handle the investor call, I assured him. As for the other issues, I'm exploring options. Devon seemed to choose his next words carefully. Rebecca, I've worked with your father for 20 years and with you for 15. I respected Howard, but... He hesitated, then committed to his thought. What he's done makes no business sense. Vanessa has no experience in pharmaceuticals, no background in corporate leadership, and no relationships with our key stakeholders. Are you concerned about your position? I asked directly. He shook his head. I'm concerned about the company, about the research that could help thousands of patients, about the 215 families that depend on Hartford paychecks. His sincerity was evident and touching. It reminded me that this fight wasn't just about my rightful place. It was about protecting what we'd all built together. I appreciate that, Devon. More than you know. After he left, I turned to the window overlooking the city. The Hartford Pharmaceuticals building, another of my initiatives replacing the outdated facilities my father had refused to update, stood as a physical manifestation of the company's transformation. The modern research labs, the collaborative spaces, the environmental sustainability features, all designed to reflect our evolution from a traditional manufacturer to an innovative life sciences company. My phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification from Dr. Lin. The Westridge trial final data had arrived early. I opened the report immediately, scanning the detailed results with the practiced eye of someone who had learned to understand. Clinical data out of necessity. The numbers confirmed Dr. Lin's preliminary assessment. Our treatment showed a 67. 3% reduction in symptom severity compared to the control group, with a safety profile that exceeded expectations. This was the kind of breakthrough that transformed companies and, more importantly, patients' lives. The kind of achievement that validated every 18-hour day, every missed holiday, every relationship sacrificed on the altar of building something meaningful. And now, just as Hartford stood on the precipice of its greatest achievement, my father had handed control to someone who couldn't distinguish between a clinical trial and a jury trial. My intercom buzzed. Dr. Lin and the research team are gathering in Conference Room B to review the Westridge data, Priya announced. They've requested your presence. Tell them I'll be right there, I replied, gathering my tablet and notes. As I walked through the executive floor toward the conference room, I passed the wall of company milestones I'd commissioned when we'd moved into the new building. Each framed photograph captured a key moment in Hartford's transformation. The first Rare Disease Advisory Board meeting, the ribbon cutting for our specialized research lab, the celebration when our first orphan drug received FDA approval. I appeared in most of the images, not centered as an executive might typically position themselves, but alongside the researchers, clinicians, and even patient advocates who had been essential to our success. That had been deliberate. I'd always viewed my role as enabling the brilliant minds we'd assembled rather than claiming their achievements as my own. Would Vanessa understand that nuance of leadership? Would she recognize that Hartford's success stemmed from the carefully cultivated culture of innovation and patient-centered decision-making? I doubted it. My sister's approach to management in her brief forays into professional life had always been characterized by taking credit and deflecting blame. The conference room was already filled with excited researchers when I arrived. Dr. Lynn stood at the head of the table, the clinical data projected on the large screen behind her. The room fell silent as I entered. News of yesterday's will reading had clearly reached everyone. "Please, continue," I said, taking a seat at the side of the table rather than my usual position at the head. "This is your moment to celebrate." Dr. Lynn nodded gratefully and resumed her presentation, walking the team through the remarkable results. The Westridge treatment, a novel approach to a rare neurological condition affecting fewer than 8,000 patients worldwide, showed not just symptom reduction, but actual disease modification in a significant percentage of patients. As the presentation concluded and the team began their technical discussion of next steps, Dr. Lynn approached me. "This is what you promised when you recruited me," she said quietly, "that we would do work that matters. And we have," I affirmed. "This treatment will change lives." "Which is exactly why we need to talk about what happens next," she continued, her expression serious. "Rebecca, half the research team is ready to follow you if you decide to leave. We've already had informal discussions." The loyalty was both touching and concerning. While it gave me potential leverage, a mass exodus would damage Hartford and potentially delay getting the Westridge treatment to patients who desperately needed it. "I appreciate the vote of confidence," I said carefully. "But let's not get ahead of ourselves. No decisions have been made about my future role." Dr. Lynn studied me with the assessing gaze she typically reserved for analyzing complex research data. "You're planning something," she concluded. "Good, because Hartford without your leadership isn't Hartford anymore." As the meeting dispersed, I checked my watch. Nearly noon, time for my lunch with Naomi and whatever interesting discovery she'd made. I'd maintained my composure throughout the morning, focusing on the work rather than the betrayal. But beneath that professional exterior, a plan was forming. The Westridge results, the Hudson contract clause, the venture capital contingencies, all pieces of a puzzle I was beginning to assemble. My father may have believed I wasn't worth a penny, but I had built something worth millions. And I had no intention of walking away from it without a fight. The upscale bistro where I met Naomi was far enough from Hartford Pharmaceuticals to avoid running into colleagues, yet close enough for a quick return if needed. We'd been meeting here for working lunches since my first year with the company, back when the legal challenges had seemed insurmountable, and Naomi's guidance had been my lifeline. "You're handling this better than I would," Naomi observed as we settled into our usual corner booth. "If my father had cut me out of my life's work, I'd be throwing things by now." "The day is still young," I replied, attempting a light tone. That didn't quite land. The waiter approached, and Naomi ordered for both of us. Another ritual dating back to when I'd been too consumed with saving Hartford to even register hunger. She'd taken to ordering my meals during those early crises months, ensuring I actually ate something during our strategy sessions. "So what's this interesting discovery?" I asked once the waiter departed. Naomi reached into her briefcase and withdrew a weathered document in a protective sleeve. "Do you remember a conversation about 5 years ago when you mentioned your grandfather had some unconventional views about family business governance?" I nodded slowly. My grandfather, Thomas Hartford, had founded the company in 1962, building it from a small compounding pharmacy into a regional manufacturer before my father took over in 1989. I'd been only 6 when he passed away, but I remembered him as warm and encouraging, so different from my father's cold perfectionism. He believed businesses should be earned, not inherited, I recalled. He used to tell me stories about starting with nothing but determination and scientific curiosity. Well, it turns out he put those beliefs into the original company incorporation documents, Naomi said, sliding the protected paper across the table. This is a copy of Hartford Pharmaceuticals' founding charter. Section 12 is particularly interesting. I scanned the document, my pulse quickening as I reached the relevant passage. Upon the founder's death or retirement, leadership shall be determined based on demonstrated commitment and contribution to the company's success, not solely on familial relationship. No transfer of controlling interest shall be valid without consideration of all qualified family members who have dedicated a minimum of 10 years of service to the company. Where did you find this? I asked, hardly daring to believe the potential implications. County archives. The original incorporation documents were filed with the business registry in 1962. When your father reorganized the company in 1991, he created a new operating entity, but never formally dissolved the original corporation. Legally, it still exists, as a holding company that controls significant intellectual property assets. The possibilities began unfolding in my mind. If the original charter was still legally binding, my father's blanket transfer to Vanessa might be contestable, not just as a matter of fairness, but as a legal breach of the company's founding governance structure. This could change everything, I murmured, reading the section again. Naomi nodded, her expression cautiously optimistic. It's not a slam dunk, but it gives us solid ground to stand on. Your 15 years of service and demonstrated contribution to Hartford's success means you have standing under the original charter. Our food arrived, but I barely noticed it, my mind racing with new possibilities. This wasn't just about reclaiming what should rightfully be mine. It was about honoring my grandfather's vision for how the company should operate and grow. What would the immediate next steps be? I asked, mentally calculating timelines. File for an injunctive hold on the transfer of company assets pending review of governance requirements, Naomi replied without hesitation. It would temporarily prevent Vanessa from making major changes while we build our case. I considered this approach, weighing potential consequences. A direct legal challenge would burn bridges irrevocably, not just with Vanessa, but potentially with board members loyal to my father. Yet the alternative was watching everything I'd built potentially dismantled by someone without the knowledge or commitment to maintain it. Do it, I decided. Prepare the filing. As Naomi made notes, my phone buzzed with a message from Priya. Board Chairman Patterson requesting urgent meeting today. Says it can't wait until Thursday. The timing was suspicious. Had news of our potential legal challenge somehow leaked already? Or was this about something else entirely? I need to get back to the office, I told Naomi, signaling for the check. Keep me updated on the filing status. Rebecca, Naomi said as we gathered our things, her expression serious. This won't be easy. Your father's influence runs deep, with the old guard at Hartford. They may resist purely out of loyalty to his memory. I know, I acknowledged. But this isn't just about me. It's about the patients who depend on us, the research we've pioneered, the employees who've invested their careers in our vision. As I drove back to the office, memories of the early years at Hartford surfaced, the challenges that had demanded every ounce of my determination and resilience. I'd joined the company straight from law school, turning down more prestigious offers with top-tier firms. My father had been dismissive of my decision. Corporate law is hardly a real specialty, he'd commented during my first week. But I suppose having an in-house attorney saves some money. At the time, Hartford had been floundering. My father's rigid adherence to proven methods had left the company dangerously behind industry trends. 3 key patents were expiring, with nothing in the pipeline to replace them. An FDA warning letter about manufacturing practices had been ignored for months. 2 promising researchers had recently departed for more innovative companies. I'd started by addressing the FDA compliance issues, spending nights and weekends drafting new standard operating procedures and quality control measures. My father had viewed it as unnecessary paperwork, until the day FDA inspectors arrived for a surprise follow-up visit and left satisfied rather than with more citations. Next came the patent crisis. I'd immersed myself in the company's research archive, discovering several abandoned projects with potential. Working directly with the remaining scientists, I'd identified 3 compounds worth revisiting with modern techniques. My father had reluctantly approved a modest research budget, less than I'd requested but enough to restart the investigations. 18 months later, one of those compounds formed the basis for a new patent application. My father had taken full credit during the board presentation, describing it as a project he'd wisely kept on the back burner until the time was right. The pattern continued for years. I would identify problems, develop solutions, implement changes, often working directly with researchers, production staff, and sales teams to understand their challenges firsthand. And my father would either claim credit for successes or blame me for any setbacks. The breaking point came 7 years into my tenure when I discovered Hartford was on the verge of financial collapse. My father had been hiding the severity of our situation, even from the board. Cash reserves were nearly depleted, a major contract was being terminated, and a competitor was quietly approaching our key researchers with job offers. I'd spent 3 sleepless days analyzing every aspect of the business, then presented my father with 2 options: implement my comprehensive turnaround plan or prepare for bankruptcy. He'd raged at my presumption, but ultimately relented when I threatened to take my findings to the board. The turnaround plan had been brutal: consolidating facilities, restructuring debt, refocusing our entire research approach toward rare diseases where we could establish leadership, rather than competing with industry giants in crowded therapeutic areas. I'd worked 100-hour weeks, sleeping on my office couch during critical phases. Personal relationships had been the first casualty. My engagement to Benjamin, a talented architect I'd met during my final year of law school, had ended after I'd missed our anniversary dinner for the 3rd consecutive year, this time because of an emergency recall issue that required immediate attention. "I can't compete with Hartford, Rebecca," he'd said gently as he returned the ring. "And I shouldn't have to." He'd been right, of course. I'd chosen the company repeatedly, postponing vacations, canceling personal commitments, rescheduling family events. At the time, it had seemed necessary. Hartford had been so fragile, requiring constant attention to survive, let alone thrive. My health had suffered next. Exhaustion-induced migraines had become regular occurrences. My doctor had warned about stress levels and sleep deprivation. I'd nodded politely while checking emails under the exam table. Even as Hartford began to stabilize and then grow under the new strategy, I'd maintained the punishing schedule. There was always another challenge on the horizon: regulatory hurdles for our new focus areas, recruiting specialized researchers, convincing skeptical investors that our pivot to rare diseases made business sense. Through it all, my father had remained critical, questioning every decision, second-guessing every strategy. The rare moments of approval came only when quarterly profits exceeded projections, and even then, the praise was tepid at best. "The numbers look fine this quarter," he'd acknowledge before immediately pivoting to whatever aspect of the business wasn't performing to his standards. The irony was that I hadn't done it for his approval. Somewhere along the way, Hartford had become more than a family obligation or career path. It had become my purpose. The letters from patients whose lives had been transformed by our treatments, the pride on researchers' faces when breakthroughs occurred, the security we provided to hundreds of employees and their families, these had become my motivation, which made my father's final betrayal all the more incomprehensible. He had witnessed the transformation firsthand. He had seen Hartford grow from a struggling generic manufacturer to an innovative leader in rare disease treatments. He had benefited personally from the increased valuation and enhanced reputation. Yet in his final act, he had dismissed 15 years of dedication and achievement, handing the company to someone who had contributed nothing to its success. As I pulled into my reserved parking space at Hartford headquarters, I pushed these painful reflections aside. The past couldn't be changed. What mattered now was securing the future, not just for me, but for everything and everyone Hartford Pharmaceuticals had come to represent. Board Chairman Patterson was waiting in my office when I arrived, his expression grave. At 72, Harold Patterson had been my father's closest friend and business confidant for decades. He'd served on the Hartford board since before I was born, and had witnessed every phase of the company's evolution. "Rebecca," he said, rising as I entered, "thank you for making time. I apologize for the urgency, but circumstances require immediate discussion." "Of course, Harold. What's happening?" He gestured for me to take a seat in my own office, a subtle power move that didn't escape my notice. "I've just come from a meeting with your sister," he began, his tone carefully measured. "She's informed me of her intention to make significant changes to Hartford's strategic direction, effective immediately." My stomach tightened. What kind of changes? "She wants to sell the rare disease portfolio to Meridian Pharmaceuticals and refocus Hartford on consumer health products, vitamins, supplements, cosmeceuticals." It was worse than I'd imagined. Meridian had been trying to acquire our rare disease research for years, offering amounts that significantly undervalued the portfolio's potential. And consumer health was notoriously competitive with thin margins and minimal barriers to entry. "That would essentially dismantle everything we've built," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Our value is in our rare disease expertise and pipeline." Patterson nodded, surprising me. "That's precisely why I'm here. The board has concerns about this direction. Vanessa may legally control the company through your father's will, but the board still has fiduciary responsibilities." A flicker of hope ignited. "What are you suggesting?" "We need time to evaluate the full implications of this transition," he said carefully. "I've convinced Vanessa to delay any major decisions until after a formal strategy review, but she's insistent on taking control by the end of the week." It wasn't much, but it was something, a small window of opportunity to implement our legal strategy based on my grandfather's company charter. "I appreciate your concerns, Harold, and I share them. Hartford's current trajectory has been carefully developed based on scientific expertise and market analysis. Abandoning it would be devastating for the company, our employees, and most importantly, the patients who rely on our treatments." Patterson studied me for a moment before responding. "Your father and I didn't always see eye to eye on your role here," he said finally. "He thought I was too supportive of your initiatives. But I've been in pharmaceutical leadership long enough to recognize genuine innovation and effective management. What you've built here deserves protection." It was perhaps the most direct acknowledgement I'd ever received from any of my father's inner circle, an unexpected alliance at the moment I needed it most. "Thank you, Harold. That means more than you know." As he rose to leave, he paused at the door. "Your grandfather would have been proud of what you've accomplished here, Rebecca. He believed pharmaceutical companies should prioritize patients over profits. Your rare disease focus embodies that philosophy." The mention of my grandfather felt like a sign, particularly given what Naomi had just discovered about the original company charter. "I've always tried to honor his vision," I replied truthfully. Once alone, I texted Naomi, "Accelerate the filing. We have days, not weeks. The battle for Hartford Pharmaceuticals was intensifying, and I needed every advantage I could muster: legal, operational, and personal. What had started as a fight for my rightful inheritance was evolving into something more fundamental, a struggle for the soul and future of the company my grandfather had founded and that I had transformed. The following morning, I prepared meticulously for Vanessa's 10 a.m. tour of the company. I selected a tailored charcoal suit that projected authority without ostentation, arranged for comprehensive department summaries to be assembled in the main conference room, and briefed key team members on the importance of maintaining professionalism despite the circumstances. Remember, I told my executive team during our 8 a.m. pre-meeting, today is about demonstrating the complexity and specialized nature of our operations. Vanessa needs to understand what she's inherited, both the value and the responsibility. Dr. Lin exchanged a knowing glance with Devon Wright. They understood the strategy, overwhelming Vanessa with the technical, regulatory, and operational intricacies she was unprepared to manage. At precisely 9:58 a.m., Vanessa arrived, 38 minutes later than the 9:20 a.m. text message in which she'd announced she was running early and expected everyone to be ready. She swept into the lobby wearing a designer dress better suited to a cocktail party than a pharmaceutical company headquarters, accompanied by a young man I didn't recognize who was frantically taking notes on a tablet. "Baby sister!" she exclaimed with theatrical enthusiasm, air-kissing near my cheeks. "Isn't this exciting?" My first day as owner of Hartford Pharmaceuticals. The reception staff studiously avoided eye contact, focusing intently on their screens. "Welcome to Hartford," I replied evenly. "I've arranged for department heads to provide you with an overview of current operations and projects." "Oh, that sounds dreadfully boring," she said with a dismissive wave. "Todd and I have already developed a vision board for the new direction. Show me my office first. I'll need to measure for redecoration." Todd, the note-taker, nodded eagerly. "We're thinking minimalist luxury for the CEO suite, lots of white with gold accents." I maintained my professional composure despite the clear implication that decisions about Hartford's future were being made based on interior design preferences rather than business strategy or patient needs. "The executive offices are on the 32nd floor," I said, guiding them toward the elevator. "But I think you'll find the research facilities on 12 through 18 and the Regulatory Compliance Center on 20. Most enlightening about Hartford's current operations." Vanessa murmured, clearly uninterested as she tapped rapidly on her phone. "By the way, I've invited some people from Meridian Pharmaceuticals to tour the research labs tomorrow. They're very excited about potential synergies." The casual mention of what would effectively be inviting competitors to examine our proprietary research sent warning signals blaring in my mind. Meridian had been trying to access our rare disease research for years, often through questionable means. "Any visitors to the research facilities require proper clearance and non-disclosure agreements," I explained, as the elevator doors opened to the 12th floor, where our initial compound screening laboratory was located. "Our intellectual property protections are quite stringent. That won't be necessary," Vanessa replied, glancing up briefly from her phone. "We're going to be partners." The presumption was staggering. Partnership discussions with a major competitor would normally involve months of careful negotiation, due diligence, and board oversight, not a casual invitation extended without any strategic evaluation. Dr. Lin was waiting for us in the main laboratory, surrounded by researchers in white coats working with sophisticated equipment. The space had been designed for both functionality and transparency. Glass-walled sections allowed visitors to observe ongoing research while maintaining necessary containment protocols. "Ms. Hartford," Dr. Lin greeted Vanessa formally. "Welcome to our primary research facility. We're currently screening compounds for 5 different rare disease targets using proprietary methods developed here at Hartford." Vanessa barely glanced at the advanced equipment or the researchers carefully monitoring experiments. "How much does all this cost?" she asked bluntly, Dr. Lin blinked, momentarily taken aback by the question's directness. Our annual research budget is approximately $28 million, which represents about 34% of our revenue, slightly above industry average for innovation-focused companies, but well justified by our success rate in bringing treatments to market. That seems excessive, Vanessa commented, turning to Todd. Make a note. Research budget needs trimming. Dr. Lin shot me an alarmed look, which I answered with a subtle shake of my head, urging restraint. Perhaps you'd like to see the results of this investment, I suggested, leading them toward a digital display wall showing the progression of our key drug candidates. Hartford currently has 7 treatments in development, 3 in clinical trials, and 2 recently approved and generating revenue. Our success rate for compounds entering clinical trials is 37%, compared to the industry average of 12%. I told Daddy for years that we should be exploring beauty and wellness products instead of all this complicated medical stuff, Vanessa said, ignoring the impressive statistics. Everyone wants to look younger and feel better. The market is huge. Hartford specializes in treatments for serious medical conditions, Dr. Lin replied, unable to completely mask her dismay. Our focus on rare diseases addresses critical unmet needs for patients with few or no therapeutic options. But there are so many more people who want anti-aging creams than who have these obscure diseases, Vanessa countered, as if explaining something obvious. It's simple math. The fundamental misunderstanding of pharmaceutical business models, where value derived from specialized treatments often far exceeded that of consumer products despite smaller target populations, was stunning. We continued the tour, moving through increasingly specialized research areas. At each stop, the pattern repeated. Expert staff would present sophisticated work addressing complex medical challenges, and Vanessa would respond with superficial observations or irrelevant comparisons to consumer products. In the pharmacokinetics lab, where scientists modeled how drugs moved through and interacted with the body, Vanessa interrupted a detailed explanation to ask, "Couldn't we use this to test cosmetics too? My friend Tiffany says clean beauty is huge right now." In the Regulatory Affairs Department, where a team of specialists managed our complex interactions with the FDA and international regulatory bodies, she commented, "This seems like a lot of people just filling out paperwork. Surely we could outsource this." By the time we reached the Clinical Trials Management Center on the 18th floor, the department heads were exchanging increasingly concerned glances. The disconnect between Hartford's specialized operations and Vanessa's comprehension was becoming painfully evident to everyone. Dr. Kaplan, our clinical research director, attempted to explain the Westridge trial results that had just arrived. The data shows a 67% reduction in disease markers, he explained, displaying complex charts on the main screen. This level of efficacy in a rare neurological condition is potentially transformative for patients. Vanessa nodded as if following along, then asked, "Could we put this in a skin cream? People would pay a fortune if it had real neuroscience behind it." Dr. Kaplan's mouth actually fell open before he caught himself. "This is a highly targeted treatment for a specific neurological disorder," he explained carefully. "It works by inhibiting a particular enzyme pathway in the central nervous system. It would have no beneficial effect as a topical application for cosmetic purposes." "Well, have you tried?" Vanessa persisted. "Todd, make a note. Test Westridge treatment for skincare line." "Westridge," Dr. Kaplan corrected automatically, his scientific precision overriding his diplomacy. "Whatever," Vanessa dismissed, with another wave. "I'm thinking Neuroglow for the product name. Very scientific sounding." The suggestion that we might repurpose a breakthrough treatment for a serious neurological disorder as an ingredient in a cosmetic product, without any scientific basis or regard for regulatory requirements, was beyond concerning. It revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of our entire business model, research approach, and ethical framework. I caught Dr. Lynn's eye across the room, and her expression confirmed what I was thinking. Vanessa's leadership wouldn't just change Hartford's direction, it would potentially destroy everything we'd built, including our scientific credibility and regulatory standing. As we moved to the executive floor for the final portion of the tour, I received an urgent text from Naomi. Injunction filed. Judge Watkins assigned to case. Initial hearing scheduled for tomorrow, 9 a.m. The timing? Couldn't have been better. We just needed to prevent any irreversible damage until the legal process could begin. The executive conference room had been prepared with comprehensive briefing materials, bound reports from each department featuring essential information any incoming CEO would need to understand the business they were taking over. The executive team was seated around the table, ready to present their sections. Vanessa took one look at the thick binders and sighed dramatically. Do I really need to read all this? Can't someone just give me the highlights? These materials contain critical information about Hartford's operations, ongoing projects, strategic partnerships, and regulatory commitments, I explained. Understanding them is essential for anyone directing the company's future. That's what I'll have you for, isn't it? She replied with a dismissive laugh. At least until the transition is complete. The executive team exchanged glances. The implication that I would somehow remain to implement her uninformed decisions while she dismantled our business model was both presumptuous and revealing of her intentions. Vanessa, I said carefully, Hartford Pharmaceuticals is a complex organization operating in a highly regulated industry with significant responsibilities to patients, healthcare providers, employees, and shareholders. The decisions you make will have far-reaching consequences. Don't be so dramatic, she replied, checking her reflection in her compact mirror rather than meeting my gaze. It's a business, not brain surgery. Actually, Dr. Kaplan interjected, unable to contain himself, our Novaris treatment is specifically designed to support brain surgery in patients with rare neurological conditions by reducing inflammation in neural tissue. The upcoming clinical trial phase is critical for— That reminds me, Vanessa interrupted, snapping her compact closed. I've scheduled a meeting with Meridian tomorrow afternoon to discuss selling the entire rare disease portfolio. Their initial offer is quite generous. The room fell silent. Even Todd stopped his frantic note-taking, sensing the sudden tension. Devin Wright, our CFO, finally spoke. Ms. Hartford, the rare disease portfolio represents approximately 82% of our current valuation and future growth potential. Selling. It would effectively hollow out the company. But it would provide immediate cash, Vanessa countered, as if this were an obvious advantage. Daddy always said business is about knowing when to cash in. I had never heard my father express any such sentiment. His flaws were numerous, but he had always taken a long-term view of the pharmaceutical business, understanding that drug development was inherently a marathon, not a sprint. Our current rare disease treatments have taken years to develop, I explained, struggling to maintain my professional tone. They represent not just financial value but scientific achievement and hope for patients with few alternatives. Selling them to a competitor at this stage would be my decision, Vanessa cut in, her pleasant facade slipping momentarily to reveal a harder edge. As owner and CEO of Hartford Pharmaceuticals. The declaration hung in the air, its implications clear to everyone present. This wasn't just about a change in leadership style or strategic emphasis. It was about a fundamental misalignment between Hartford's nature as a specialized pharmaceutical innovator and Vanessa's vision of a quick-profit business she could reshape without regard for its core purpose. Perhaps we should review the financial implications of such a decision, I suggested, nodding to Devin, who quickly pulled up a detailed analysis on the main screen. For the next 40 minutes, we walked through the financial, operational, and strategic ramifications of divesting the rare disease portfolio. The presentation was factual and data-driven, highlighting the long-term revenue projections, the synergies between different research programs, and the significant value still untapped in our pipeline. Throughout, Vanessa's attention repeatedly drifted to her phone. She interrupted several times with questions that revealed her limited understanding. Why can't we just license these treatments instead of selling them outright? These aren't apps or consumer products, Devin explained patiently. Pharmaceutical treatments involve ongoing responsibility for manufacturing, quality control, regulatory compliance, and pharmacovigilance. You can't simply license the intellectual property without these operational components. What about just raising the prices on existing treatments to increase revenue? Our pricing strategy is carefully calibrated to balance accessibility for patients with sustainable business operations, I explained. Significant price increases would trigger payer resistance, potential regulatory scrutiny, and damage to our reputation as a patient-focused company. As the meeting concluded, Vanessa stood abruptly. "This has been fascinating," she said in a tone that suggested the opposite. "But I have a lunch appointment. Todd has my contact information if anything urgent comes up." With that, she swept out of the room, leaving her untouched briefing materials on the table. A stunned silence followed her departure. Finally, Dr. Lin spoke what everyone was thinking. "She's going to destroy everything we've built." "Not if we can help it," I replied, turning to the team. "The company charter may provide legal grounds to challenge her control, and we've just filed for an injunction to pause any major decisions while the court reviews the case." "How can we help?" Devin asked immediately. "Document everything," I instructed. "Every interaction with Vanessa, every directive that conflicts with established protocols or regulatory requirements, every decision that could potentially harm the company's value or compromise patient care. We need to build a clear record of why her leadership threatens Hartford's core mission and sustainability." As the team dispersed, each with clear instructions for handling the developing crisis, I remained in the conference room, reviewing my notes from the tour. The morning had confirmed my worst fears about Vanessa's capacity to lead Hartford, but it had also strengthened my resolve to fight. This wasn't just about inheritance or fairness anymore. It was about protecting something valuable from someone who couldn't possibly understand what she was dismantling. It was about preserving a company that improved and saved lives through innovation and commitment to patients. My phone buzzed with a message from Board Chairman Patterson. "Heard about the Meridian meeting. Board very concerned. Need to talk." Another ally was emerging, perhaps not out of personal loyalty to me, but out of recognition that Vanessa's leadership threatened the company's fundamental value and mission. I gathered the briefing materials Vanessa had ignored and headed back to my office. The hearing tomorrow morning represented our first chance to legally challenge her control. We needed to be thoroughly prepared. As I walked through the executive floor, I passed staff members who looked to me with worried expressions. News of Vanessa's visit and her casual discussion of selling our core assets had clearly spread rapidly. "Is it true?" My assistant Priya asked as I reached my office. "Is she really selling the rare disease portfolio to Meridian?" "Not if I can help it," I replied with more confidence than I felt. "We have options, Priya. Legal options, and we're going to use every one of them." The battle for Hartford Pharmaceuticals had moved from theoretical to immediate. Vanessa's visit had made it abundantly clear. She wasn't just an undeserving inheritor. She was an existential threat to everything the company stood for. After Vanessa's illuminating visit, I cleared my afternoon schedule and retreated to the small strategy room adjacent to my office. This windowless space with its whiteboard walls had witnessed the development of Hartford's most critical initiatives over the years. It was where I'd mapped out the rare disease pivot, planned the research facility expansion, and developed the global regulatory strategy that had enabled our international growth. Today, it would serve a different purpose, mapping out the battle for Hartford's future. I began by writing our timeline on the left wall. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., Injunction hearing with Judge Watkins. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Vanessa's scheduled meeting with Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Friday, Vanessa's self-declared deadline for taking control. Next Tuesday, board meeting. Next Thursday, quarterly investor call. The compressed time frame added urgency to an already complex situation. We had less than 24 hours before the first legal confrontation, and only days before Vanessa might attempt to finalize a devastating deal with Meridian. On the front wall, I created 3 columns: legal strategy, business strategy, and alliance building. Under legal strategy, I listed grandfather's original charter provisions, key person clauses in critical contracts, board fiduciary responsibilities, potential restraining order against Meridian discussions, documentation of business judgment concerns. Under business strategy, I noted quantify value destruction of Vanessa's proposed actions, alternative structure proposals, contingency plan for research continuity, strategic partner outreach, client-on-vendor relationship protection. Under alliance building, I wrote, board members, Patterson confirmed, others TBD, executive team, solid, research leadership, Lynn, Kaplan confirmed, key investors, patient advocacy groups, hospital, healthcare. System partners, I stepped back to review the framework, adding notes and connections between elements. This wasn't a single-track challenge. It required coordinated action across multiple domains simultaneously. My phone buzzed with a message from Naomi. Judge Watkins reviewing our filing. Known for business law expertise and precedent adherence. Good draw for us. I added this information to the legal column. Judge Watkins' reputation for thorough examination of corporate governance issues improved our chances of securing the initial injunction, a critical first step. Next, I pulled up Hartford's current organizational chart and ownership structure on my tablet. While my father's will had left his controlling interest to Vanessa, the company's operations depended on a complex web of relationships, contracts, and regulatory approvals that couldn't simply be transferred like furniture or jewelry. A knock at the door interrupted my analysis. Devin Wright entered, carrying a stack of financial documents. I pulled the data you requested, he said, placing the materials on the small conference table. The financial impact assessment of divesting the rare disease portfolio. I gestured to the whiteboard walls. I'm mapping our strategy. What did you find? Devin opened the top folder and removed a summary sheet. It's worse than I initially calculated. Selling the rare disease portfolio to Meridian wouldn't just eliminate our primary revenue growth engine, it would trigger multiple downstream effects. He pointed to specific figures as he explained. First, we'd lose approximately 82% of projected future revenue based on our current pipeline. Second, the research talent flight would be immediate and severe. Our scientists are here specifically because of our rare disease focus. Third, we'd face potential legal challenges from research partners and grant providers whose funding was designated for specific rare disease initiatives. What about immediate financial impact? I asked, adding these points to the business strategy section. Company valuation would likely drop by 65–70% once the market understood the implications, Devin replied grimly. And that's not accounting for reputation damage with the medical community. We've built Hartford's brand on rare disease expertise and patient advocacy. Abandoning that would destroy decades of goodwill. I added these projections to the whiteboard, connecting them to potential board concerns. Directors had fiduciary responsibilities to protect company value. A 70% valuation drop resulting from Vanessa's uninformed decisions could potentially trigger liability issues for board members who approved such actions. Have you spoken with any other board members besides Patterson? I asked, turning to the alliance building column. Devin nodded. Informally, yes. Lowell and Matsuda are concerned about Vanessa's plans. They were present when your father made his succession decision, and both have indicated it was made during a period when his judgment may have been compromised by medication. This was new information and potentially significant. If my father's decision had been made while his cognitive capacity was impaired by pain medications or other treatments for his illness, it could further strengthen our legal challenge. Do they have specific examples? I asked, adding this point to the legal strategy column. Lowell mentioned a board meeting 3 months ago where your father confused current revenue figures with projections from 2019. Matsuda said he seemed particularly fixated on old grievances during his final weeks. I made detailed notes of these observations. 3 supportive board members, Patterson, Lowell, and Matsuda, represented a significant block, though not yet a majority of the 7-person board. My phone buzzed again. A message from Dr. Lin. Research team documentation. Complete. 37 specific instances where Vanessa's proposed changes would create regulatory compliance issues. Another piece falling into place. I added this to our legal strategy section. For the next 2 hours, I continued building our comprehensive approach, interrupted periodically by updates from key team members. Each contribution added depth to our strategy, connecting legal leverage points with business imperatives and stakeholder concerns. Dr. Kaplan provided a detailed analysis of how selling the rare disease portfolio would impact patients currently enrolled in clinical trials, a compelling ethical dimension to complement our business arguments. The head of regulatory affairs delivered a devastating assessment of Vanessa's proposed NeuroGlow cosmetic idea, documenting multiple regulatory violations that would result from repurposing pharmaceutical compounds without proper testing and approvals. Our head of communications prepared 2 separate messaging strategies, one for the scenario where we secured the injunction, another for if we needed to mobilize patient advocacy groups and healthcare partners to apply external pressure. As evening approached, I finally stepped back to review the comprehensive strategy taking shape across the whiteboard walls. What had begun as a simple inheritance dispute had evolved into a multi-dimensional battle for Hartford's identity and future. The strategy room door opened, and Naomi entered, looking both exhausted and energized. "The hearing preparation is complete," she announced, placing a thick legal brief on the table. "And I've got more on the original charter provisions. It's even stronger than we initially thought." She joined me at the whiteboard, scanning my extensive notes and diagrams. "This is impressive," she said. "You've mapped the entire battlefield." "We need to be prepared for every scenario," I replied. "Vanessa may be scientifically ignorant, but she's cunning when it comes to getting what she wants. And what she wants is to cash out Hartford's value as quickly as possible, regardless of the consequences." Naomi pointed to the legal strategy column. "The charter provisions give us our strongest opening argument. Your grandfather explicitly required leadership transitions to consider qualified family members with significant company service." The language is surprisingly modern for a document from 1962. "My grandfather was progressive in many ways," I noted. "He built the company during an era when most pharmaceutical businesses were focused solely on profitable mass-market medications. He specifically chose to develop treatments for conditions other companies ignored." "That founding mission aligns perfectly with your rare disease focus," Naomi observed. "Another point in our favor: you've stewarded the company in a way that honors its original purpose, while Vanessa's plans represent a fundamental departure." I added this perspective to our arguments. The alignment between my leadership and my grandfather's founding principles strengthened our case that his charter provisions should be upheld. "What's your assessment of our chances tomorrow?" I asked, turning to the immediate challenge of the injunction hearing. Naomi considered the question carefully. "Judge Watkins has a reputation for thoroughness. He won't make a snap judgment based on sympathy or first impressions. But the legal foundations of our case are sound. I'd say we have a 70% chance of securing the temporary injunction. And if we don't, then we move immediately to Plan B," she replied, pointing to the business strategy column. mobilize the board's fiduciary concerns, and leverage the key person clauses in our major contracts to prevent immediate damage while we pursue additional legal remedies. I nodded, having already mapped these contingencies. In complex battles, advanced planning for multiple scenarios was essential. My phone buzzed with yet another update, this one from Board Chairman Patterson. 3 more directors expressing concerns about Meridian meeting. Emergency board call scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow before your hearing. This was a significant development. If we had 5 of 7 board members aligned before the hearing, it would substantially strengthen our position with Judge Watkins. The board is moving in our direction, I told Naomi, showing her the message. That's crucial, she confirmed. Judges prefer not to interfere with corporate governance when avoidable. If the board itself expresses concerns about Vanessa's leadership, it gives the court cleaner grounds for granting the injunction. As we continued refining our strategy, my assistant Priya knocked and entered with a concerned expression. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you should know. Vanessa's assistant Todd just called the research department requesting access codes for the secure databases containing our proprietary formulations. He said Vanessa needs them for her meeting with Meridian tomorrow. The alarm this triggered was immediate and severe. Our proprietary formulations represented the core intellectual property of Hartford Pharmaceuticals, the culmination of years of research and millions in investment. Providing them to Meridian would effectively hand our competitive advantage to a rival, regardless of whether a formal sale was eventually completed. What response did they give? I asked, already moving to the communication section of our strategy. They said any access requests needed to come through proper channels with appropriate documentation, Priya replied. Todd seemed frustrated but said he'd get back to them. Alert IT security immediately, I instructed. All research database access should require additional verification until further notice, and document this request thoroughly. It's exactly the kind of action that demonstrates the threat to company assets. As Priya left to implement these measures, Naomi was already adding notes to our legal brief. This is textbook improper handling of intellectual property, she said. Attempting to share proprietary formulations with a competitor before any due diligence process or confidentiality agreements are in place, it strengthens our case significantly. I turned back to the strategy boards, adding this new development and drawing connections to multiple elements of our approach. What had begun as a personal battle for my rightful place was rapidly evolving into a race to prevent irreparable harm to Hartford Pharmaceuticals. We need to prepare for the possibility that Vanessa might take more aggressive actions overnight, I said, considering worst-case scenarios. She clearly intended to bring our proprietary information to Meridian tomorrow. I'll prepare an emergency filing for tonight if needed, Naomi agreed. If we can document attempts to transfer intellectual property inappropriately, we might be able to get an emergency restraining order before the morning hearing. For another hour, we continued refining our strategy, adjusting priorities based on new information, and strengthening connections between different elements. By the time we finished, the whiteboard walls told the story of a comprehensive battle, plan addressing legal, business, and alliance dimensions of the conflict. Get some rest, I told Naomi as we finally prepared to leave. Tomorrow will be intense. What about you? She asked, noting the late hour. I glanced back at the strategy. Room, at the walls covered with our plans to save Hartford Pharmaceuticals. I need to make one more stop before I leave. After Naomi departed, I took the private elevator to the 16th floor, home to our most advanced research lab and the heart of our rare disease program. At this hour, only the essential overnight research staff remained, monitoring long-running experiments that couldn't be interrupted. Dr. Wong, one of our senior researchers, looked up in surprise as I entered the main laboratory. Ms. Hartford, I didn't expect to see you here this late. Just needed to remind myself what we're fighting for, I replied, moving to the observation window that overlooked the main research floor. Below, sophisticated equipment hummed quietly as automated systems continued the painstaking work of testing compound variations. On the wall, a large monitor displayed real-time data from patient samples being analyzed for biomarkers, each representing a person suffering from conditions most pharmaceutical companies considered too rare to address. This was Hartford's true legacy, not just a business to be bought and sold, but a mission to improve lives that would otherwise be neglected by mainstream medicine. It was what my grandfather had intended when he founded the company, what I had recommitted to when I transformed our focus, and what Vanessa was prepared to discard for a quick profit. My phone buzzed with a final message for the night, from Patterson. All directors now on board with challenging Vanessa's Meridian meeting. Unanimous support for protecting rare disease portfolio pending full review. A full board alliance, the final piece we needed before tomorrow's hearing. I allowed myself a moment of cautious optimism. The battle for Hartford Pharmaceuticals would be fought on multiple fronts, legal, business, and ethical. But with thorough preparation and strategic alignment of our arguments, we had created the strongest possible position. As I left the building that night, I glanced back at the illuminated Hartford Pharmaceuticals sign above the entrance. Whatever happened in court tomorrow, I was prepared to fight with every resource and strategy available. Not just for my inheritance, but for the company's soul and the patients who depended on our commitment to diseases others ignored. Some battles were about pride or possession. This one was about purpose. The morning of the injunction hearing, I woke before dawn in my downtown apartment. Sleep had been fitful at best, my mind continuously cycling through arguments, counter-arguments, and contingency plans. As I prepared for the day, selecting a conservative navy suit that projected both authority and restraint, my phone rang with an unexpected name on the screen. Aunt Vivian. My father's sister had always been something of a family outlier. Unlike my status-conscious father, Vivian, had pursued a career in academic research, eventually becoming a respected biochemist at Northwestern University. She had maintained a careful distance from family business matters, particularly after a falling out with my father years ago over what she'd called his profit-first perspective on healthcare. "Rebecca," she said when I answered, her voice warm despite the early hour. "I hope I'm not calling too early. I just heard about Howard's will yesterday, and I wanted to reach out before your hearing this morning." "You know about the hearing?" I asked, surprised. "We hadn't publicized the legal challenge. Patterson called me," she explained. "He thought I should know what's happening with the company my father built." The reference to my grandfather sent a flutter of hope through me. Aunt Vivian had been close to him, working in his original laboratory during college summers before pursuing her own scientific career. "I'm glad he reached out," I said, setting aside my makeup to focus on the call. "Things are complicated right now." "That's putting it mildly," she replied with a short laugh. "Rebecca, I'm calling because there are things you should know about your grandfather's intentions for Hartford. Things that might be relevant to your case today." I switched the phone to speaker and reached for a notepad. "I'm listening." "Thomas Hartford founded that company with a specific philosophy," Vivian began. "He believed pharmaceutical companies had an ethical obligation to address medical needs regardless of market size. He used to say, 'We develop treatments because patients need them, not because shareholders demand them.' This aligned perfectly with the company direction I'd established with our rare disease focus. When your father took over in 1989, Vivian continued, there was significant tension between them over this philosophy. Howard wanted to pursue mass-market medications exclusively, more predictable revenue, larger patient populations. Thomas insisted on maintaining research programs for several rare conditions, even writing specific provisions into the company governance documents to protect those initiatives. "The charter provisions," I murmured, making notes. Exactly. But there was more to it than just the formal documents. Thomas was deeply concerned about Hartford's future direction. He confided in me that he worried Howard would prioritize business metrics over scientific advancement and patient needs. That's precisely what happened in the early years of my father's leadership, I confirmed. Hartford drifted away from innovative research toward generic manufacturing. It was financially stable, but scientifically stagnant. Which is why your grandfather would be so proud of what you've accomplished, Vivian said, her voice softening. When I first read about Hartford's pivot to rare disease research under your leadership, I actually called Thomas's old research partner Walter to discuss it. We both agreed it was as if Thomas's vision had been reborn in his granddaughter. The validation from someone who had known my grandfather's scientific philosophy firsthand brought an unexpected lump to my throat. Thank you for telling me that, I managed, my professional composure momentarily wavering. There's something else, Vivian continued. Something more personal that might help you understand Howard's actions. Have you ever wondered why there was such distance between your father and me? The question caught me off guard. The rift between my father and his sister had always been present in my life, but rarely discussed. Family gatherings had been carefully scheduled to avoid overlap, communications formally polite, but never warm. I assumed it was about different life choices, I said cautiously. His focus on business versus your academic career. That's part of it, she acknowledged. But the core issue was deeper. When our father Thomas was considering succession planning for Hartford, I was actually his first choice to take over leadership. This revelation stunned me into silence. I had never heard even a whisper of this family history. I had the scientific background, the understanding of pharmaceutical research, and a commitment to Thomas's founding principles, Vivian explained. Howard had business acumen but limited scientific understanding and different priorities. Our father recognized these differences. What happened? I asked, trying to imagine how different Hartford might have been under Vivian's leadership. I declined, she said simply. I was deeply involved in my own research at Northwestern, close to breakthroughs I couldn't abandon. So leadership passed to Howard instead, with my father's reluctant blessing and significant governance provisions intended to maintain the company's original mission. I noted the parallel to my own situation. Qualified female leadership passed over, though, in Vivian's case by choice rather than exclusion. Howard never forgave me for being our father's first choice, Vivian continued. He viewed it as an insult to his capabilities, a suggestion that his business focus was somehow less valuable than my scientific orientation. That perceived slight colored his entire approach to running Hartford, and I suspect it influenced his view of you as well. The pieces suddenly aligned with disturbing clarity. My father's consistent undermining of my initiatives, his reluctance to acknowledge my contributions, his final act of disinheritance, all potentially stemming from an unresolved wound to his pride decades earlier. You think he saw me as a reminder of that original succession plan? I said slowly, the realization dawning. A scientifically minded woman in leadership, just as his father had wanted, but with his own daughter. I think Howard has been fighting old battles his entire life, Vivian replied gently. And unfortunately, you became collateral damage in a conflict that began long before you were born. As I processed this revelation, Vivian continued, I'm telling you this not to speak ill of my brother, but to help you understand that his decision may have had very little to do with your actual capabilities or contributions to Hartford. And perhaps to give you some peace, regardless of what happens today in court. I appreciate that, I said sincerely, but it also strengthens my resolve to fight for Hartford's future. If my grandfather's original vision aligned so closely with the direction I've taken the company, that supports our argument that the charter provisions should be upheld. Precisely why I called, Vivian affirmed. And Rebecca, I'd be willing to provide a declaration regarding these matters if your attorney believes it would be helpful. The offer of direct support from a family member, the first I'd received since this ordeal began, was unexpectedly moving. That could be tremendously valuable, I said. May I have Naomi contact you this morning? Of course. And Rebecca, good luck today. Hartford deserves leadership that understands both its business requirements and its scientific purpose. After we disconnected, I sat for a moment absorbing the new context Vivian had provided. The personal dimension of this conflict had just expanded significantly, from a simple case of paternal favoritism to a multi-generational struggle over Hartford's very identity. I quickly called Naomi to brief her on this new information before heading to the office for the pre-hearing board. Call. The possibility of having Vivian's testimony about my grandfather's original intentions could substantively strengthen our case. When I arrived at Hartford headquarters, the mood was noticeably tense. Staff members spoke in hushed tones, eyes following me with a mixture of concern and hope. News of the injunction hearing had clearly spread throughout the company. In the AJAT's executive conference room, my assistant Priya was setting up for the 8 a.m. board call. The directors are all confirmed, she reported. And I've prepared the documentation packets you requested, one highlighting the regulatory risks of Vanessa's proposed changes, another summarizing the key person clauses in our major contracts. Thank you, I said, reviewing the materials. Any word from Vanessa this morning? Nothing directly, but Todd called IT again at 6:30 a.m., still trying to get access to the research databases. Security logged the attempt and denied access per your instructions. Another documented instance of inappropriate handling of proprietary information, further evidence for our case. Ms. Hartford? A voice from the doorway drew my attention. Margaret, my father's longtime assistant, stood there looking uncomfortable. In her hand was a large envelope. May I speak with you privately? I nodded, stepping into my adjacent office with her. Margaret had worked for my father for over 20 years, maintaining a formal professionalism that had sometimes made her seem aloof. She had been present at the will reading, but had not met my eyes during the devastating pronouncements. I've been struggling with this decision, she began once the door closed behind us. Your father was my employer for most of my career, and I've always maintained absolute confidentiality regarding his affairs. I understand your loyalty, I said, unsure where this conversation was heading. But I also have an obligation to the company itself, she continued, and what's happening now troubles me deeply. She placed the envelope on my desk, her hand lingering on it momentarily. 3 months ago, your father asked me to type up a letter amending certain provisions of his will. He was not himself that day. The pain medication had been increased, and he was confused about several matters, referring to board members who had retired years ago, asking about stock prices from the previous decade. I remained silent, allowing her to proceed at her own pace. I prepared the letter as instructed, but when I returned the next day for his signature, he had no recollection of requesting it. His doctor had adjusted his medication, and he was much more lucid. He dismissed the amendment entirely. She tapped the envelope. This is that unsigned amendment. In it, he specified that while Vanessa would receive the family properties and financial accounts, operational control of Hartford Pharmaceuticals would remain with you as CEO, with Vanessa receiving only dividend income from the shares. My heart raced as I processed the implications. The document wasn't legally binding without my father's signature, but it represented a critical insight into his intentions during a period of greater lucidity. The final version of the will was executed during a week when his medication was particularly strong, Margaret continued. I've noted the specific dates and medication changes on the cover sheet, along with my observations of his mental state during both periods. Margaret, this could be crucial information for the court to consider, I said carefully. Would you be willing to provide a sworn statement regarding these observations? She straightened her shoulders, resolution evident in her posture. That's why I'm here. What's happening to Hartford isn't what your father would have wanted during his clearer moments, and it certainly isn't what's best for the company he devoted his life to building. Before I could respond further, Priya knocked, urgently. The board is connecting for the call. All 7 directors are online. I'll be right there, I assured her, then turned back to Margaret. Thank you for bringing this to me. It means more than you know. Just do right by the company, Ms. Hartford, she replied simply. That's all I ask. With the envelope securely, in my briefcase and a quick message to Naomi about this new development, I entered the conference room for the board call. The large screen displayed 7 faces in a grid, the directors who would play a crucial role in determining Hartford's fate. Good morning, everyone, Board Chairman Patterson began. As you're aware, we're facing an unprecedented situation regarding the transition of leadership at Hartford Pharmaceuticals. I've called this emergency session to address immediate concerns about proposed actions that may impact company value and operations. I listened as Patterson outlined the situation objectively. The will provisions granting Vanessa control, my legal challenge based on the original company charter, and the immediate concern about the scheduled meeting with Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Before we hear from Rebecca, Patterson continued, I want to confirm that each of you has reviewed the financial impact assessment prepared by Mr. Wright regarding the proposed divestiture of our rare disease portfolio. 6 heads nodded solemnly. And you've all received Dr. Lynn's analysis of the research implications and Dr. Kaplan's patient impact statement. Again, confirmation from all directors. Then I'll turn the floor over to Rebecca to address specifics, concerns, and answer any questions before we determine our position as a board. For the next 20 minutes, I presented a focused overview of the situation, emphasizing the board's fiduciary responsibility to protect company value regardless of ownership transitions. I outlined the legal basis for our injunction request, the business rationale for maintaining our rare disease focus, and the ethical obligations to patients currently enrolled in our clinical trials. As I concluded, Director Lowell, one of my father's oldest friends and business associates, spoke first. Rebecca, I want to be clear that I had tremendous respect for your father. We worked together for over 30 years. But his decision regarding succession appears to have been made without full consideration of its implications for Hartford's operations and value. I share that assessment, Director Matsuda added. The board's primary responsibility is to the company's sustainability and shareholder value. Based on the documentation provided, Ms. Vanessa Hartford's proposed actions would significantly compromise both. One by one, each director expressed similar views, formal, carefully worded statements that nevertheless represented a clear alignment with my position rather than Vanessa's. By the time the discussion concluded, the board had unanimously approved a resolution expressing concern about the proposed Meridian meeting and supporting a temporary pause on major structural or strategic changes pending full review. It was the strongest possible statement of support heading into the injunction hearing. As the call ended, Patterson remained online for a final private word. Rebecca, I've known your family for 40 years, he said, his usually formal demeanor softening slightly. I was there when your grandfather handed leadership to Howard, and I've watched you transform Hartford over the past 15 years. Whatever happens in court today, I want you to know that your contributions to this company are recognized and valued by those of us who understand what you've built. The validation from someone who had witnessed the full arc of Hartford's history, from my grandfather's founding vision through my father's stewardship and into my own leadership, provided a moment of personal satisfaction amid the professional crisis. Thank you, Harold, I replied simply. That means a great deal. As the screen went dark, I checked the time. 1 hour until the hearing. I gathered my materials, including Margaret's envelope with its potentially game-changing evidence, of my father's fluctuating intentions. This battle for Hartford Pharmaceuticals had evolved dramatically in just a few days. What had begun as a shocking disinheritance had revealed layers of family history, corporate governance, and ethical considerations that transcended simple questions of ownership or control. Whatever the outcome in court, the relationships within, the Hartford family and company had been irrevocably altered. Old wounds had been exposed, new alliances formed, and buried truths brought to light. As I prepared to leave for the courthouse, my phone buzzed with a text from an unexpected source, my mother, who had maintained careful neutrality since my father's death and the subsequent will reading. "I know you're in court today. Whatever happens, remember that your worth isn't determined by your father's last words or legal documents. I'm proud of what you've built at Hartford. Fight for what matters." The simple message brought unexpected tears to my eyes. In all our family's complicated dynamics, my mother's perspective had often been overlooked, the quiet witness to decades of tension between my father's commercial focus and my own scientific orientation. Her support, coming at this critical moment, completed a circle of validation. From my team who recognized my professional value, from Aunt Vivian who connected me to my grandfather's original vision, from the board who acknowledged my business, judgment, and now from my mother who affirmed my personal worth independent of corporate battles. Strengthened by this network of support, I headed for the courthouse. The fight for Hartford Pharmaceuticals wasn't just about inheritance or control. It was about honoring connections across generations, from my grandfather's founding principles through my own leadership to the patients whose lives depended on our continued commitment to treating conditions others ignored. Some battles were fought in courtrooms with legal arguments, but their true significance lay in the relationships and values that gave them meaning. The Westlake County Courthouse stood as a monument to judicial gravitas, all limestone columns, and imposing steps designed to make visitors feel the weight of legal proceedings before they even entered the building. As I climbed those steps with Naomi beside me, briefcases in hand, the media presence caught me by surprise. "Ms. Hartford, is it true you're suing your sister over your father's pharmaceutical company?" "Rebecca, do you dispute your father's right to leave his company to your sister?" "Ms. Hartford, how do you respond to rumors that this challenge is motivated by sibling rivalry rather than business concerns?" Naomi placed a guiding hand on my elbow, steering me through the throng. Without responding, we had anticipated some media interest. Disputes involving family-owned businesses worth hundreds of millions occasionally drew attention, but the number of reporters suggested someone had deliberately alerted the press. "Vanessa," I murmured to Naomi as we passed through security. "She's trying to frame this as a petty family squabble." "Let them say what they want," Naomi replied calmly. "Judge Watkins cares about law and precedent, not headlines." In the courthouse's marble-floored lobby, we spotted our opposition for the first time. Vanessa stood with a team of 3 attorneys from Blackwell and Reed, one of the city's most prestigious firms specializing in trust and estate law. She was dressed in somber gray, a calculated choice that struck a more appropriate tone than her casual approach during yesterday's office tour. She noticed us at the same moment, whispering something to her lead counsel before approaching with a camera-ready smile. "Rebecca, darling," she said loudly enough for nearby reporters to hear. "This is all so unnecessary. We're family. We should be working together, not fighting in courtrooms." The performance was masterful, positioning herself as the reasonable party seeking reconciliation while I appeared divisive and litigious. I maintained professional composure despite the transparent manipulation. "This isn't about family dynamics, Vanessa. It's about company governance and protecting Hartford's future." "Of course it is," she replied with exaggerated understanding. "Though I can't help but wonder if you'd feel the same way if Dad had chosen you instead of me." Before I could respond, a court officer called our case number, directing us to Courtroom 3. Naomi guided me away from the brewing confrontation toward our hearing. Judge Raymond Watkins presided over a courtroom that reflected his reputation for no-nonsense efficiency. Unlike the ornate public spaces of the courthouse, his domain was modern, practical, and tech-enabled. Multiple screens for document display, video conferencing capabilities, and digital recording systems. The judge himself, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and penetrating eyes behind rimless glasses, reviewed documents on his tablet as we assembled before him. His reputation for thorough preparation and business law expertise had made him our preferred judicial assignment. This is a hearing on application for temporary injunctive relief in the matter of Hartford versus Hartford, he began, without preamble, once we were seated. Before we proceed, I want to clarify the scope of today's proceedings. We are not adjudicating the ultimate validity of Howard Hartford's will or its provisions. That would require a separate probate proceeding. Today's question is narrowly focused on whether temporary injunctive relief is warranted to maintain the status quo while underlying legal questions are resolved. He looked up, sharp eyes moving between the parties. With that understanding, counsel for the plaintiff may begin. Naomi rose, her posture conveying confident authority. Your Honor, this case centers on governance provisions in Hartford Pharmaceuticals' founding charter that place specific conditions on leadership transitions, conditions that were not considered. When Howard Hartford's will transferred controlling interest to Vanessa Hartford, we seek temporary injunctive relief to prevent irreversible actions that could fundamentally alter the company before these governance questions are properly resolved. For the next 20 minutes, Naomi presented our core argument with precision and clarity. She walked through the original charter provisions requiring consideration of qualified family members with significant company service, demonstrated my 15-year history with Hartford, and documented contributions to its growth, and highlighted the immediate threats posed by Vanessa's planned meeting with Meridian Pharmaceuticals. This isn't merely about which family member controls the company, Your Honor, she emphasized. It's about preventing potentially irreversible damage to a specialized pharmaceutical firm with obligations to patients, research partners, and shareholders. The plaintiff doesn't seek to override her father's will permanently today, but rather to maintain operational stability while proper governance processes are followed. Judge Watkins interrupted with his first question. Counselor, why wouldn't normal business judgment protections be sufficient here? The board of directors has fiduciary responsibilities regardless of who holds controlling interest. 2 reasons, Your Honor, Naomi responded without hesitation. First, the scheduled meeting with Meridian Pharmaceuticals to discuss selling the rare disease portfolio could create binding commitments before the board has an opportunity to fully exercise those responsibilities. Second, while the board has expressed concerns, Ms. Vanessa Hartford holds majority voting power through the shares transferred in the will, potentially limiting the board's practical authority to prevent precipitous actions. The judge nodded thoughtfully before turning to Vanessa's legal team. Counsel for the defendant, your response? Lawrence Blackwell, Vanessa's lead attorney and a prominent figure in estate law circles, approached the podium with the confident ease of someone accustomed to high-stakes litigation. Your Honor, this case represents an unfortunate attempt to use corporate governance technicalities to override the clear testamentary intent of Howard Hartford. The will's language is unambiguous. Mr. Hartford wished for his daughter Vanessa to assume control of the company he built. Blackwell proceeded to argue that the original charter provisions had been effectively superseded by subsequent corporate reorganizations, that temporary injunctions required demonstration of irreparable harm rather than mere business disagreements, and that courts should be extremely reluctant to interfere with a testator's clearly expressed wishes regarding his own property. What we have here, Your Honor, is simply disappointment over an inheritance decision. Ms. Rebecca Hartford may disagree with her father's choice, but that disagreement doesn't constitute legal grounds to override his explicit instructions regarding his own company. As Blackwell continued, I noticed Judge Watkins reviewing certain documents with particular attention, specifically, the original charter with its succession provisions. He interrupted Blackwell mid-argument. "Counsel, I have a question about the 1991 reorganization you referenced. Did that reorganization explicitly dissolve the original corporate entity, or merely create a new operating structure above it?" The question went directly to the heart of our case, whether the original charter still had legal standing. Blackwell appeared momentarily thrown by the specific inquiry. "The 1991 changes created a new operating company that assumed all business functions, Your Honor." "That wasn't my question," Judge Watkins noted. "Was the original corporate entity formally dissolved?" Blackwell glanced toward his junior associates, who quickly flipped through their materials. "I don't believe there was a formal dissolution filed," he acknowledged. However, the practical effect was to transfer all operational control to the new entity. Yet the original entity continued to exist as a holding company for certain assets, Judge Watkins observed, now reviewing another document. "And that original entity remains subject to its charter provisions, correct?" "Technically, yes," Blackwell conceded, "but the relevance is minimal given that all meaningful business operations transfer." "I'll determine relevance, counselor," the judge interrupted firmly. "The question is whether governance provisions in a still existing corporate entity have legal standing, not whether you consider them practically important." The exchange revealed Judge Watkins had honed in on precisely the leverage point we had identified: the continued legal existence of the original corporate entity with its charter provisions intact. As the arguments proceeded, a court officer approached the judge, handing him a note. After reading it, Judge Watkins addressed the courtroom. "I've been informed that we have 2 potential witnesses who have come forward with information potentially relevant to these proceedings. Normally, I would not hear witnesses during an injunctive relief hearing, but given the time-sensitive nature of the issues involved, I'll make a limited exception." He glanced at the note again. "The court will take brief testimony from Margaret, Wells, and Dr. Vivian Hartford, after which counsel will have an opportunity for limited questions relevant to the injunction request only." Vanessa turned to her attorneys with visible alarm. She clearly hadn't anticipated testimony from either my father's assistant or his sister. Margaret was called first, entering with the composed dignity that had characterized her 20 years of service to my father. Under oath, she recounted exactly what she had shared with me earlier: the unsigned amendment that would have kept operational control of Hartford with me while giving Vanessa the financial assets, the fluctuations in my father's mental clarity, corresponding with medication changes, and her observations about his confusion during the period when the final will was executed. "To be clear," Judge Watkins asked, "you're testifying that Howard Hartford, during periods of greater lucidity, expressed an intention to separate the company's operational control from the financial ownership?" "Yes, Your Honor," Margaret confirmed. "The amendment I was instructed to prepare specifically maintained Ms. Rebecca Hartford as CEO with operational authority, while granting Ms. Vanessa Hartford ownership of the shares and income from them. And this amendment was never signed because when Mr. Hartford's medication was adjusted the following day, he had no recollection of requesting it and dismissed it entirely," Margaret explained. "His mental clarity fluctuated significantly during his final months, correlating directly with changes in his pain management protocol. The implications were profound, suggesting that my father's final will might have been executed during a period of diminished capacity, and that his true intention during clearer moments might have been a more balanced approach to succession." Aunt Vivian testified next, providing historical context about my grandfather's original vision for Hartford Pharmaceuticals and the succession tensions between my father and herself decades earlier. She explained how the charter provisions requiring consideration of qualified family members had been specifically designed to ensure scientific and patient-focused leadership rather than purely financial management. "My nephew Howard struggled with the scientific aspects of pharmaceutical development throughout his career," Vivian explained with familial gentleness. It was a source of insecurity for him, particularly given our father's background as a research pharmacist. The charter provisions were Thomas Hartford's attempt to ensure that future leadership would maintain the scientific integrity he considered essential to the company's purpose. Judge Watkins asked several pointed questions about the specific language in the charter and my grandfather's expressed intentions regarding succession planning. Vivian's answers, drawing on her direct conversations with my grandfather and her own experience as his originally preferred successor, provided powerful context for the governance provisions at the center of our case. When cross-examination began, Blackwell attempted to characterize both witnesses as biased toward me, but their straightforward responses and clear personal knowledge of the relevant facts proved difficult to undermine. Margaret's daily interaction with my father during his illness established her as a credible witness to his mental state, while Vivian's academic credentials and direct knowledge of my grandfather's intentions gave her testimony particular weight. As the hearing progressed toward its conclusion, Judge Watkins focused increasingly on the immediate issue of Vanessa's scheduled meeting with Meridian Pharmaceuticals. "Ms. Hartford," he addressed Vanessa directly, "what precisely is the purpose of tomorrow's meeting with Meridian?" Vanessa, somewhat startled at being questioned personally rather than through counsel, adopted her most reasonable tone. "Simply exploratory discussions, Your Honor. I'm considering various strategic options for the company's future direction, including potentially selling the rare disease portfolio that currently represents the majority of the company's value and future prospects," the judge pressed. "I'm just gathering information at this stage," she replied carefully. "No decisions have been made." Judge Watkins then turned to me. "And Ms. Hartford, what specific harm do you believe could result from these exploratory discussions?" "Three primary concerns, Your Honor," I responded. "First, Hartford's proprietary research methodology and compound structures represent intellectual property worth hundreds of millions. Even exploratory discussions risk exposing these to a direct competitor. Second, news of potential divestiture could trigger research staff departures and undermine ongoing clinical trials that patients depend on. And third, contractual obligations with research partners and healthcare systems could be jeopardized by even preliminary divestiture discussions." The judge nodded thoughtfully, then announced he would take a 30-minute recess to review all materials before ruling on the injunction request. As the courtroom cleared, Naomi and I stepped into a private consultation room to assess our position. "The judge is focused on exactly the right issues," Naomi observed. "The continued existence of the original corporate entity and its governance provisions provides the leverage we need." "Margaret and Vivian's testimony was extremely helpful," I added, "particularly the evidence about my father's fluctuating mental state during the will preparation. That opens the door to a potential challenge of the will itself on capacity grounds," Naomi agreed, "though that would be a separate legal process from today's injunction request." Our discussion was interrupted by a knock at the door. To my surprise, it was Harold Patterson, who had apparently been observing the proceedings from the back of the courtroom. "Rebecca, I wanted to share something that might be relevant before the judge returns," he said after joining us. "I've been reviewing old board minutes from the 1991 reorganization, and I found something significant that I don't believe your father was aware of." He placed a document on the table, a board resolution from October 1991 specifically addressing the relationship between the original charter and the new operating structure. This resolution explicitly states that the original corporate entity would continue to exist as a holding company, and that its charter provisions regarding leadership qualifications and succession planning would remain in effect for any controlling interest transfers. I scanned the document with growing excitement. The resolution, signed by all board members including my father, created an explicit bridge between the original charter provisions and the reorganized company structure, directly contradicting Blackwell's argument that the charter requirements had been effectively superseded. "This is the missing link," Naomi said, quickly reviewing the language. It establishes that the charter provisions weren't just technically in effect for a dormant entity, they were intentionally maintained as binding governance requirements for the entire corporate structure. How did this not come up during discovery? I asked, amazed that such a critical document had remained hidden. It was in the archived board minutes, not the main corporate governance files, Patterson explained. I only found it because I was specifically looking for anything from that transition period that might help clarify the relationship between the entities. Naomi immediately prepared to present the newly discovered document to Judge Watkins when court resumed. This resolution represented the definitive leverage point we had been seeking. Clear documentary evidence that the charter provisions regarding qualified family members in succession planning remained binding even after the corporate reorganization. When court reconvened and we presented the 1991 board resolution, Judge Watkins took considerable time reviewing it alongside the other materials. Blackwell attempted to minimize its significance, but the judge's increasingly pointed questions suggested he recognized its importance to our case. Finally, Judge Watkins delivered his ruling. Having reviewed all evidence and arguments, I find that the plaintiff has established sufficient grounds for temporary injunctive relief pending full consideration of the underlying governance issues. The 1991 board resolution explicitly maintaining the original charter provisions, combined with evidence of potential irreparable harm to company operations and value, justifies maintaining the status quo until these complex governance questions can be properly adjudicated. He continued with specific directives. Therefore, the court orders that, first, no sale, transfer, or substantive discussion regarding divestiture of Hartford Pharmaceuticals' rare disease portfolio or related intellectual property may proceed until the governance dispute is resolved. Second, operational control of Hartford Pharmaceuticals shall remain with the current management team, led by Rebecca Hartford as CEO, for a period of 60 days while expedited proceedings regarding the charter provisions are completed. Third, Vanessa Hartford's rights as financial beneficiary of the Hartford shares remain unchanged, but her exercise of voting control is temporarily suspended pending resolution of the governance requirements. The ruling represented everything we had sought: preservation of Hartford's core business, continuation of my operational authority, and time to fully adjudicate the complex legal questions raised by the charter provisions and evidence of my father's fluctuating intentions. As we exited the courthouse, reporters again swarmed for comments. This time, with the injunction secured, I felt confident enough to offer a brief statement. Today's ruling isn't about family disagreements. It's about protecting Hartford Pharmaceuticals' patients, research, and long-term value while complex governance questions are properly addressed. I remain committed to upholding the scientific excellence and patient focus that have defined Hartford since my grandfather founded the company. In the car returning to Hartford headquarters, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge the magnitude of what we had accomplished. The 1991 board resolution wasn't just a technical legal point. It represented my father's own agreement, decades earlier, that the company's leadership should be determined by qualification and commitment to its founding principles, not simply by inheritance. That resolution, combined with Margaret's testimony about my father's fluctuating intentions and Vivian's insights into my grandfather's original vision, had provided the critical leverage needed to protect Hartford Pharmaceuticals from hasty dismantling. The battle wasn't over, but we had secured the time and legal foundation needed to fight for Hartford's future the right way, through careful consideration of governance requirements, business value, and patient needs rather than rushed decisions, based on inheritances and emotions. As we pulled up to Hartford headquarters, I saw staff members gathered in the lobby anxiously awaiting news. Their concerned expressions transformed into smiles and relief as I entered. The company wasn't just a corporate entity or an inheritance. It was a community of dedicated professionals who had invested their careers in our shared mission. We have 60 days, I told Naomi as we stepped into the elevator. 60 days to transform a temporary victory into a permanent solution. 60 days to ensure Hartford stays true to its founding purpose, she agreed. The leverage we had discovered wasn't just a legal technicality, it was a thread connecting Hartford's past to its future, my grandfather's vision to my leadership, and the company's scientific purpose to its business success. Some battles were won through force. This one had been won by finding the right pressure point, the precise leverage that could move even the weight of a seemingly ironclad will. The aftermath of the court ruling brought a temporary sense of stability to Hartford Pharmaceuticals. Research teams resumed their work with renewed focus, knowing their projects weren't in immediate jeopardy. The executive team implemented careful documentation protocols to create a record of sound governance during our 60-day window. Board members began a thorough review of all corporate governance documents to strengthen our position for the final resolution. I had expected an immediate counterattack from Vanessa, perhaps an emergency appeal of the injunction or attempts to undermine my authority through back channels with executives or board members. Instead, an eerie silence descended. Her attorney had issued a brief statement expressing disappointment with the ruling, but confirming they would comply with its terms pending further legal proceedings. Vanessa herself had disappeared from public view, canceling her scheduled media appearances and withdrawing from social commitments. This uncharacteristic retreat made me uneasy. Vanessa had never been one to accept defeat gracefully, even in minor childhood competitions. Her silence suggested she was regrouping, perhaps planning something beyond the straightforward legal challenges we had anticipated. 3 days after the court ruling, as I worked late finalizing our quarterly earnings report, my assistant Priya buzzed my intercom. "Ms. Hartford, your sister is here to see you." The unexpected announcement sent a ripple of tension through me. "Did she have an appointment?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "No. She says it's urgent family business that can't wait." I considered refusing the meeting. Our attorneys had advised minimal direct contact during the legal proceedings, but curiosity won out. What could be urgent enough to bring Vanessa here in person after days of silence? "Send her in," I decided. "And Priya, stay within earshot, please." Vanessa entered my office with none of her usual dramatic flair. Gone were the designer outfits and performative cheerfulness. Instead, she wore a simple black pantsuit, her expression uncharacteristically serious. "Rebecca," she said by way of greeting, closing the door behind her. "Vanessa," I replied evenly. "This is unexpected." She glanced around my office, taking in the research awards, the framed patents, the photographs of our clinical research, teams celebrating breakthrough results. "I've been doing some thinking since the hearing," she began, remaining standing despite the visitor chairs available. "About Dad, about the company, about us." Her subdued demeanor put me on high alert. This wasn't the Vanessa I knew, the sister who turned every interaction into a performance, who wielded charm and manipulation with equal skill. "I'm listening," I said carefully. "You've built something impressive here," she continued, gesturing toward the window that overlooked the research campus. "I didn't fully understand the scope of it until the court hearing. The way people talked about the work being done, the patients involved." I remained silent, waiting for the turn I knew was coming, the pivot to whatever she actually wanted from this conversation. "The thing is," she continued, "I've been talking with some financial advisors. Even with the court's temporary ruling, I still legally own the shares Dad left me. They represent hundreds of millions in potential value." "That's correct," I acknowledged. "The injunction addressed operational control, not ownership." "Which means," she said, finally taking a seat across from me, "that we both have something the other wants. You want control of Hartford. I want to realize the financial value of what Dad left me." And there it was, the real purpose of this unexpected visit. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, though I had already begun to see the outline of her approach. A settlement, Vanessa replied simply. One that gives us both what we want without further legal battles or family drama. She leaned forward slightly. I'll transfer full voting control of the Hartford shares to you, removing any governance challenges. In exchange, you arrange for a corporate buyback of 70% of my shares at a premium to current valuation, giving me liquid assets while you maintain controlling interest. The proposal was surprisingly straightforward, a clean separation that would leave me with uncontested control of Hartford Pharmaceuticals and Vanessa with substantial liquid wealth rather than illiquid company shares. Why now? I asked. Your attorneys seemed prepared for a prolonged legal battle 3 days ago. Because I finally took a hard look at the situation, she admitted with uncharacteristic candor. The truth is, I don't want to run a pharmaceutical company. I never did. I wanted what Dad's shares are worth, not the responsibility of managing researchers and clinical trials and FDA regulations. She gestured toward the technical journals on my desk. That's your world, not mine. Always has been. The admission was perhaps the most honest thing Vanessa had ever said to me. Throughout our lives, she had been driven by appearance, status, and immediate gratification, seeking the fruits of success without the sustained effort required to build something meaningful. And the court ruling made you reassess your position, I suggested. She shrugged, a glimpse of her usual self showing through. Let's just say it clarified the probable outcomes. My attorneys explained that between the charter provisions, the board resolution, and the evidence about Dad's fluctuating capacity, a final ruling might leave me with financial ownership but permanent operational restrictions. So you'd rather cash out now than wait for an uncertain outcome? I'd rather we both get what we actually want, she countered. You want to run Hartford your way, continuing your rare disease research and patient-focused approach. I want financial freedom without corporate responsibilities. This solution delivers both. The proposal was tempting in its simplicity. A negotiated settlement would avoid months of legal battles, eliminate uncertainty for researchers and patients, and allow me to focus on advancing Hartford's scientific mission rather than defending my position. Yet something about Vanessa's sudden pragmatism raised warning flags. She had never been one to accept partial victories or reasonable compromises. What would the timeline be for this proposed share buyback? I asked, probing for potential complications. That's where it gets interesting, she replied, shifting slightly in her seat. I'd need the transaction completed within 30 days. That's an extremely aggressive timeline for a transaction of this magnitude, I noted. The board would need to approve the share price premium. Financing would need to be arranged. I have a buyer already lined up for some real estate investments I've been considering, she interrupted. They need an answer within 30 days, and I need liquidity to make those purchases. The specific time frame seemed arbitrary and artificial, exactly the kind of manufactured urgency that raised suspicions. If Vanessa genuinely wanted a clean settlement, she would be more flexible on timing. I'd need to discuss this with the board and our financial advisors, I said neutrally. A share buyback of that size would have significant implications for our capital structure. Of course, she agreed too readily. I just wanted to present the concept directly, sister to sister, before lawyers get involved and complicate everything. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at it briefly before standing. I should go. But think about it, Rebecca. This could be the cleanest resolution for everyone involved. After she departed, I sat contemplating the unexpected proposal. On the surface, it offered a direct path to what I had been fighting for. Uncontested, control of Hartford Pharmaceuticals with its rare disease focus and scientific mission intact. But Vanessa's urgency and the specific 30-day timeline suggested hidden motivations. I pulled up Hartford's financial calendar on my computer, looking for anything significant occurring around that time frame. Nothing obvious appeared. No major FDA decisions, clinical trial endpoints, or financial reporting deadlines that would represent particular leverage points. I called Naomi to brief her on Vanessa's visit and the settlement proposal. "It sounds too straightforward for Vanessa," Naomi observed after I outlined the terms. "What's the catch?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," I replied. "The 30-day timeline seems artificial, but I can't identify any obvious Hartford events that would explain it." "What about looking beyond Hartford?" Naomi suggested. Vanessa mentioned real estate investments. Could there be something there? The question triggered a memory, something I'd seen months ago in a business journal about luxury commercial development in the downtown arts district. I quickly searched online, finding the article I remembered. "Bridgewater Development Group," I murmured, scanning the piece. "They're planning a $300 million luxury retail and residential complex in the arts district. The city council votes on final zoning approval and tax incentives in 35 days. "And this connects to Vanessa how?" Naomi asked. "I'm not certain." "Yet," I admitted. "But she mentioned real estate investments requiring liquidity within 30 days. The timing aligns too perfectly to be coincidence." We agreed Naomi would quietly investigate any connections between Vanessa and Bridgewater Development, while I consulted with our financial team about the feasibility of her proposed share buyback. The following morning, I called a confidential meeting with Devin Wright, our CFO, and Hartford's outside financial advisors to discuss the proposal's implications. I deliberately excluded any details about my suspicions regarding Vanessa's urgency, wanting their unbiased assessment of the financial aspects. From a purely financial perspective, a structured share buyback could be arranged, Devin concluded after thorough analysis. We'd need to use a combination of cash reserves and new debt financing, but our balance sheet could support it without jeopardizing research programs or planned expansions. "What about the premium she's expecting above current valuation?" I asked. "That's more problematic," our lead financial advisor acknowledged. "Given the current uncertainty around governance and control, Hartford's shares would likely trade at a discount if we were publicly listed. Paying a premium above an already inflated internal valuation would be difficult to justify to the board on financial grounds alone." The discussion continued, exploring various structures and financing approaches. By lunch, we had developed a preliminary framework that could potentially accommodate Vanessa's core requirements while protecting Hartford's financial stability, though with a longer timeline than her demanded 30 days. As I returned to my office, Naomi called with her findings. "Your instincts were right," she said without preamble. "Vanessa is listed as a silent partner in a limited liability company that owns 15% of Bridgewater Development Group. And here's where it gets interesting. If the Arts District project receives final approval, their property values are projected to increase by 40–50% overnight. So she needs liquidity to increase her investment position before the city council. Vote, I reasoned, the pieces falling into place. Exactly. But there's more, Naomi continued. I checked with a contact in the city planning department. The proposal has faced significant community opposition due to concerns about displacing existing arts organizations and small businesses. Bridgewater has been countering with promises of community benefits and affordable components, but they're still facing an uphill battle with the council. How does this connect to Hartford? I asked, sensing there was more to the story. Hartford Pharmaceuticals is one of the city's largest employers and most respected corporate citizens, Naomi explained. Your advocacy for rare disease patients has given the company significant goodwill and influence. If Hartford were to publicly support the development as providing economic benefits to the city, our endorsement could tip the council vote in Bridgewater's favor, I finished, the full picture becoming clear, and substantially increase the value of Vanessa's investment, which she can only maximize if she has capital to increase her ownership percentage before the vote, Naomi confirmed. Vanessa's seemingly straightforward settlement proposal now revealed its hidden complexity. She wasn't simply seeking liquidity for generic real estate investments. She was orchestrating a specific play to multiply her wealth through Hartford's corporate influence, which she could only access while maintaining some connection to the company. The revelation left me with a profound strategic dilemma. On one hand, the settlement would give me what I had been fighting for: clear control of Hartford without prolonged legal battles. On the other hand, it would indirectly use Hartford's reputation to support a development that might harm the arts community while enriching Vanessa through what amounted to insider positioning. As I weighed these considerations, my assistant announced another unexpected visitor, Board Chairman Patterson, who had apparently left a board meeting at another company to speak with me urgently. "I've just come from lunch with George Harmon," he said after taking a seat in my office. Harmon was a prominent city council member and longtime family friend of the Pattersons. He mentioned something disturbing that I thought you should know. Immediately. I listened as Patterson explained that Vanessa had been meeting with council members, suggesting that Hartford Pharmaceuticals would be expanding its downtown presence as part of the Bridgewater development, adding research facilities, and creating jobs in exchange for the council's support of the project. "She has no authority to make such commitments," I said, alarm growing at this new dimension of Vanessa's machinations. "The court explicitly prohibited her from operational decisions." "She's being careful not to make formal commitments," Patterson clarified. "Just floating possibilities and creating impressions that Hartford is aligned with Bridgewater's vision. Several council members are already publicly linking the potential development to Hartford's continued growth. This unauthorized use of Hartford's name and reputation crossed a line from troubling to potentially damaging. If the council approved the development based partly on implied Hartford participation that never materialized, the company's credibility with city government could be severely compromised. The situation demanded immediate action, a direct confrontation to halt Vanessa's unauthorized activities before they created binding expectations or public commitments involving Hartford. I asked Patterson to arrange an emergency meeting with Vanessa himself and both sets of attorneys at the neutral location of his law firm's offices. The formal setting and presence of counsel would ensure the conversation remained focused and documented. 3 hours later, we assembled in Patterson's firm's elegant conference room overlooking the city skyline, including a clear view of the arts district that stood at the center of our discussion. Vanessa arrived, flanked by Lawrence Blackwell and another attorney from his firm, her expression revealing irritation at the sudden summons. "What's this about?" she demanded as soon as pleasantries had been exchanged. "I thought we were considering a private settlement." "This meeting is about your unauthorized use of Hartford Pharmaceuticals' name and reputation in discussions with city council members," I replied directly. "You've been suggesting Hartford's expansion into the Bridgewater development to influence the upcoming zoning vote, despite having no authority to make such commitments." Her momentary flash of surprise confirmed our information was accurate. "I've merely discussed possibilities," she countered, quickly recovering. "Nothing binding or definitive." "You have no standing to discuss any possibilities regarding Hartford's operations or future planning," Naomi interjected firmly. "The court order explicitly prohibited your involvement in operational matters pending resolution of the governance dispute." "Which is why I proposed a settlement," Vanessa argued, turning to me. "To resolve these governance questions quickly and cleanly. A settlement with a 30-day timeline that conveniently precedes the city council vote on a development project you have a financial stake in," I noted. "A project you've been promoting using Hartford's name without disclosure of your conflict of interest." For the first time since our confrontation began, Vanessa appeared genuinely unsettled. She clearly hadn't expected us to uncover her connection to Bridgewater or her discussions with council members so quickly. "Business interests often overlap in a city this size," she replied, attempting to dismiss the concern. "There's nothing improper about exploring synergies between development projects and corporate expansion. There is when you're using a Company's reputation without authority while concealing your personal financial interest, Patterson countered. The board would view such actions very seriously. Lawrence Blackwell, sensing the deteriorating position, attempted to redirect the conversation. Perhaps we should focus on the settlement proposal itself rather than these peripheral matters. The basic framework offers benefits to both parties. The settlement cannot be separated from these peripheral matters, I responded firmly. Vanessa's actions demonstrate that what appeared to be a straightforward proposal actually conceals an attempt to leverage Hartford's reputation for personal financial gain. As the discussion continued, I maintained absolute clarity on two non-negotiable positions. First, any settlement would require full disclosure to the City Council regarding Vanessa's connection to Bridgewater and explicit correction of any impressions that Hartford had committed to the development. Second, any share buyback would proceed on a timeline determined by Hartford's financial requirements, not by Vanessa's investment deadlines. These terms are unacceptable, Vanessa finally snapped, her facade of reasonable compromise crumbling. The whole point of settlement is efficiency and mutual benefit. The point of settlement is resolution that honors the company's interests and governance requirements, I corrected, not facilitating undisclosed conflicts of interest or artificial timelines driven by personal investment strategies. After nearly 2 hours of increasingly tense exchanges, Vanessa and her attorneys requested a private consultation. When they returned, Blackwell presented a modified approach. Vanessa would issue a clarification to council members regarding Hartford's non-commitment to the development, and in exchange, we would consider a partial share buyback on an expedited basis for a portion of her holdings. This still fails to address the fundamental issue, I replied. Any settlement must prioritize Hartford's governance integrity and financial health, not external investment timelines. And it must include full disclosure of all relevant conflicts of interest. As the meeting concluded without resolution, Vanessa finally dropped all pretense of sisterly compromise. You think you've won because of some technicality in grandfather's charter, she said, gathering her belongings. But Dad left everything to me for a reason. He knew who could be trusted with his legacy. The bitterness in her voice revealed the personal dimension that had been lurking beneath the business and legal maneuvering all along. This isn't about who Dad trusted more, I replied quietly. It's about who's committed to what Hartford Pharmaceuticals actually is, a company that develops life-changing treatments for people with few other options. That was Grandfather's vision, and it's the mission I've dedicated my career to advancing. How convenient that your definition of the right vision aligns with keeping power for yourself, she shot back. Not power, Vanessa. Responsibility. There's a difference you've never understood. As she departed with her legal team, Patterson turned to me with a thoughtful expression. That went about as expected, he observed. But it revealed something important. She's more desperate for that quick liquidity than we realized. Her Bridgewater investment must be significant. Which gives us leverage in the broader resolution, Naomi added. She needs cash more than she needs a prolonged fight over control. The direct confrontation had transformed what had initially appeared to be a simple settlement negotiation into a multi-dimensional chess match involving corporate governance, city politics, development interests, and family dynamics. Vanessa's attempt to manipulate Hartford's reputation for personal gain had backfired, exposing her true priorities and strengthening our position. Draft a formal communication to the City Council, I instructed Naomi as we left the meeting. It should clarify that Hartford has made no commitments regarding the Bridgewater development and has no current plans for expansion into that district. What about the settlement discussions? She asked. We proceed, but on our terms and timeline, I decided. A gradual, phased buyback that protects Hartford's financial stability while providing Vanessa with progressive liquidity, but not in time for her to maximize her Bridgewater investment before the council vote. Direct confrontation hadn't produced an immediate resolution, but it had accomplished something perhaps more valuable: clarity about the true nature of the conflict and the principles that would guide its ultimate resolution. This wasn't simply about inheritance or control anymore. It was about the integrity of Hartford Pharmaceuticals, the proper use of its influence, and the values that would shape its future. Some confrontations ended with clear victories or defeats. This one had revealed a path forward, one that required steadiness, transparency, and unwavering commitment to the company's true purpose. 2 weeks after our confrontation with Vanessa, Hartford Pharmaceuticals faced a pivotal moment that would shape both public perception and the ongoing battle for the company's future. Our quarterly earnings call, scheduled months before the inheritance dispute erupted, would be the first public forum where I would address investors, analysts, and industry observers since the court granted the temporary injunction. Under normal circumstances, these calls followed a predictable format: presentation of financial results, updates on research milestones, guidance for future quarters, and carefully scripted responses to analyst questions. Today would be different. The inheritance dispute, court ruling, and uncertainty about Hartford's leadership had generated intense interest far beyond our usual audience. "We've got over 200 participants registered for the call," Devin Wright reported during our preparation meeting that morning. "That's triple our normal attendance. And the analyst questions submitted in advance focus more on governance and control than on quarterly performance." Despite the fact that our results exceeded projections across all key metrics, Dr. Lin added, highlighting the unfortunate distraction from Hartford's actual performance. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The quarter had been one of Hartford's strongest ever. Revenue up 17% year over year, 2 promising compounds advancing to the next phase of clinical trials, and a breakthrough partnership with Mayo Clinic for our Westridge treatment. Yet these achievements risked being overshadowed by the family drama that had captured media attention. "We need to redirect focus to Hartford's operational excellence and patient impact," I said, reviewing our presentation materials, while acknowledging the governance situation transparently without letting it dominate the narrative. We spent the next hour refining our approach, anticipating difficult questions, and ensuring our core message remained clear. Regardless of ownership structures or legal proceedings, Hartford Pharmaceuticals remained focused on its scientific mission and commitment to patients with rare diseases. As the call's start time approached, I received an unexpected message from Naomi. "Vanessa has registered for the earnings call under Bridgewater Development's name. Be prepared for potential disruption." Her participation complicated an already challenging situation. While the call was open to all interested parties, Vanessa's presence suggested she might attempt to use this public forum to advance her narrative or challenge my leadership directly in front of the investment community. At precisely 11 a.m., our investor relations director opened the call with standard disclaimers before introducing me to present the quarterly results. I began with a measured, professional overview of Hartford's financial performance, research milestones, and strategic initiatives, deliberately maintaining the same structured approach we had used in previous quarters. Before turning to our forward guidance, I continued, addressing the elephant in the room. I want to briefly address the temporary leadership structure currently in place at Hartford Pharmaceuticals. As many of you are aware, following Howard Hartford's passing, questions arose regarding the governance requirements for leadership transitions under our founding corporate documents. The court has granted a temporary order maintaining operational continuity under current management, while these governance questions are resolved. I kept my explanation factual and devoid of personal commentary about Vanessa or my father's will. Most importantly, I emphasized, this temporary structure has ensured zero disruption to our research programs, clinical trials, or patient access to treatments. The executive team remains fully focused on advancing our scientific mission and building on the strong performance you've seen in this quarter's results. The presentation portion concluded, we moved to the Q&A session, the part of the call I knew would prove most challenging. The first question came from Sandra Michaels at Morgan Stanley. Thank you for addressing the governance situation, Ms. Hartford. Could you provide more specific details about the timeline for resolving these questions permanently, and what impact resolution might have on Hartford's strategic direction? The court has established a 60-day period for expedited proceedings regarding the governance requirements, I replied. We're currently in discussions about potential resolutions that would maintain Hartford's focus on rare disease treatments while addressing all stakeholders' interests. What I can state unequivocally is that our commitment to scientific excellence and patient-focused research will remain the cornerstone of Hartford's strategy, regardless of the specific resolution. The next analyst asked about potential impacts on our research partnerships. Some of your academic and clinical research collaborators have expressed concern about potential changes in Hartford's rare disease focus. How are you addressing these concerns during this period of uncertainty? This question touched on a critical issue: the anxiety our situation had created among research partners whose work depended on Hartford's continued commitment to rare disease treatments. We've been proactively communicating with all research partners, I explained. The court order specifically prevents any changes to our rare disease portfolio or research directions during this period. Additionally, the board has unanimously expressed support for maintaining our current strategic focus. We've provided partners with detailed continuity plans and reaffirmed our commitment to the collaborative research that has defined Hartford's approach. The next voice on the call sent a ripple of tension through our conference room. This is Vanessa Hartford, my sister announced, abandoning the Bridgewater identity she had used to register. I'd like to address the characterization of the current situation. Our investor relations director hesitated, looking to me for guidance on whether to mute the unexpected intervention. I gave a small nod to allow her to continue. Silencing her would only create an impression of fear or evasion. As the legal beneficiary of Howard Hartford's controlling interest in the company, Vanessa continued, her voice composed and professional, I want to assure investors that I am committed to maximizing Hartford's value and potential. The temporary court order has delayed, but not diminished my intention to bring fresh perspective and expanded market opportunities to the company my father built. She was carefully positioning herself as a forward-thinking steward rather than acknowledging her previously stated intentions to sell off the rare disease portfolio and pivot to consumer products. While my sister has done admirable work with the rare disease focus, she continued, I believe Hartford has opportunities in broader markets that remain unexplored. The current governance dispute is simply about ensuring all strategic options receive proper consideration. The reframing was clever, presenting her approach as complementary expansion rather than fundamental redirection, casting me as narrowly focused while portraying herself as innovatively comprehensive. The moment called for direct but measured response. I appreciate Vanessa's perspective, I replied, keeping my tone collegial despite the ambush. And I welcome her acknowledgement of the value Hartford has created through its rare disease focus. Where we differ is in our assessment of where Hartford's greatest future value lies. Our exceptional results this quarter demonstrate the scientific and commercial success of our specialized approach. I continued, addressing the broader audience rather than engaging in direct debate with Vanessa. Hartford's current valuation and growth trajectory stem directly from our leadership in rare disease treatments, an area where we've built substantial competitive advantages through specialized knowledge, patient relationships, and proprietary research methods. This focused strategy has delivered the 32% compound annual growth rate investors have benefited from over the past 5 years. The subtle reference to Hartford's performance metrics under my leadership served as an implicit contrast to Vanessa's lack of pharmaceutical experience. Another analyst jumped in. Ms. Vanessa Hartford, could you elaborate on the specific broader markets you believe represent opportunities for the company? It was the perfect follow-up question, requiring Vanessa to move beyond vague assertions to specific business strategy. Certainly, she replied, her confidence unwavering despite stepping into terrain where her knowledge was limited. I believe Hartford could leverage its pharmaceutical expertise in consumer wellness products, cosmeceuticals with therapeutic properties, and lifestyle medications, markets with significantly larger customer bases than rare diseases. Her answer revealed exactly what I had hoped it would: a fundamental misunderstanding of pharmaceutical business models, value creation, and Hartford's specific competitive advantages. Rather than directly challenging her assessment, I allowed the next questioner to probe further. How would you address the regulatory pathways and development timelines for these consumer markets, which differ substantially from Hartford's current specialty pharmaceutical approach? Vanessa's response became increasingly vague, referencing strategic partnerships and phased transitions, without demonstrating understanding of the complex regulatory, scientific, and commercial realities of pharmaceutical development. As the exchange continued, a clear contrast emerged not through direct confrontation, but through the natural exposure of differing levels of industry knowledge. My responses remained focused on specific data points, research milestones, and strategic rationales, while Vanessa's relied increasingly on generalities and business platitudes. When asked about the Westridge trial results and their implications for patients with rare neurological conditions, I provided detailed context about mechanism of action, efficacy measurements, and quality of life improvements. When Vanessa was asked how her proposed consumer focus would affect ongoing clinical trials, she struggled to address the scientific and ethical dimensions of research continuity. The dynamic shifted further when Dr. Lin was invited to discuss our research pipeline. Her passionate, technically precise description of how Hartford's integrated research approach had overcome challenges in developing the Novartis treatment demonstrated the depth of scientific expertise driving our success, expertise that couldn't simply be redirected toward consumer products without losing its fundamental value. As the call progressed, analysts' questions increasingly focused on concrete operational and scientific matters, rather than governance uncertainties, a natural gravitation toward substance over drama. Vanessa's interventions became less frequent, as the discussion moved deeper into pharmaceutical development specifics where her knowledge gaps became apparent. Near the end of the session, a question arrived that perfectly encapsulated the fundamental issue at stake. For both Ms. Rebecca Hartford and Ms. Vanessa Hartford, how do you define success for Hartford Pharmaceuticals over the next 5 years? The question cut to the heart of our differing visions for the company. Vanessa answered first. Success would be significant expansion of Hartford's market presence, diversification into higher volume consumer segments, and maximized shareholder returns through strategic partnerships or targeted acquisitions. Her answer was textbook business school rhetoric, unobjectionable in its emphasis on growth and returns, but revealing in its lack of reference to patients' treatments or scientific advancement. When my turn came, I took a moment before responding. Hartford Pharmaceuticals was founded with a mission to develop treatments that improve and save lives, I began. Success over the next 5 years means advancing that mission through continued scientific innovation focused on conditions with limited treatment options. Specifically, that means bringing our current late-stage compounds through successful clinical trials and regulatory approval, expanding patient access to our approved treatments globally, maintaining our industry-leading 37% success rate for compounds entering clinical development, and delivering sustainable financial returns that enable continued investment in research. I concluded with the perspective that had guided my leadership. Financial performance is essential, but as a means to fulfill our purpose, not as the purpose itself. Success is measured ultimately by the patients whose lives are improved by treatments that wouldn't exist without Hartford's commitment to addressing underserved medical needs. The contrast between our answers encapsulated the fundamental choice facing Hartford, between a vision centered on patient impact supported by financial success, and one focused on financial returns potentially disconnected from the company's founding purpose. As the call concluded, our investor relations director thanked participants and provided standard follow-up information. The moment the line disconnected, the room erupted in analysis of what had just transpired. "That couldn't have gone better if we'd scripted it," Devin observed. Vanessa essentially demonstrated why she shouldn't be running a specialized pharmaceutical company. "The analyst questions were perfect," Dr. Lin added. "They naturally highlighted the depth of industry-specific knowledge required for effective leadership in this sector." While the team celebrated what they perceived as a clear victory in the court of public opinion, I maintained a more measured perspective. This wasn't about winning or losing, I reminded them. It was about demonstrating Hartford's continued focus on its core mission despite leadership uncertainties. Within hours, the impact of the earnings call began reverberating through various channels. Industry publications highlighted Hartford's strong quarterly performance and research advances, with several noting the stark contrast in pharmaceutical knowledge displayed during the call. Investment analysts issued updated recommendations, with most maintaining or upgrading their outlook on Hartford based on operational fundamentals rather than governance concerns. Most significantly, we received messages of support from key stakeholders who had been watching closely, research partners reaffirming their commitment to ongoing collaborations, patient advocacy groups expressing relief about continuity in treatment development, and hospital systems confirming their intention to maintain Hartford's treatments in their formularies. By late afternoon, Naomi called with additional feedback. The transcript of the call is circulating among the legal community. Several prominent corporate governance attorneys have commented that it provides compelling evidence for why the charter provisions requiring qualified leadership should be upheld. That evening, my mother called, a rare occurrence since my father's death and the subsequent will reading. Her perspective caught me by surprise. "I listened to the call today," she said without preamble. "You handled yourself with remarkable grace under difficult circumstances." "Thank you," I replied, uncertain where the conversation was heading. "Your father would never admit it," she continued, "but he would have been proud of how you articulated Hartford's mission. That fusion of scientific purpose with business acumen was what he always struggled to achieve himself." The comment offered an unexpected window into my father's complex relationship with Hartford's dual identity as both scientific enterprise and commercial venture, and perhaps with me as the daughter who had managed to integrate those dimensions, in a way he had found challenging. "Vanessa called me afterward," my mother added. "She was frustrated by how the call unfolded. I think she's beginning to understand the depth of what she's up against. Not just legally, but in terms of pharmaceutical expertise and company culture. Did she indicate any willingness to consider settlement terms that would protect Hartford's rare disease focus?" I asked. "Not explicitly," my mother replied, "but she mentioned for the first time that perhaps there are alternative arrangements that could give her financial benefits without operational control. It might be the first crack in her absolute position." The public forum had accomplished what direct confrontation could not. It had allowed the stark reality of pharmaceutical leadership requirements to become evident through natural demonstration rather than adversarial argument. Vanessa's interventions had inadvertently highlighted precisely why Hartford's governance provisions, requiring qualified leadership, served a legitimate business purpose, rather than merely restricting family succession. As I reviewed my notes, from the call that evening, I recognized that we had reached a turning point in the battle for Hartford's future. The dispute had moved beyond family dynamics and legal technicalities into the realm of substantive business judgment and industry expertise. The quarterly earnings call had transformed a private inheritance dispute into a public demonstration of what leadership actually meant in the context of a specialized pharmaceutical company, with lives depending on its decisions. The next day, an unexpected email arrived from Lawrence Blackwell, Vanessa's attorney. Following yesterday's quarterly earnings presentation, my client has expressed interest in resuming settlement discussions with modified parameters. Please advise if UI would be amenable to a meeting early next week. The message confirmed what the public forum had suggested. Vanessa's position was evolving in response to the realities of pharmaceutical leadership that had been so clearly displayed. Whether driven by dawning self-awareness or pragmatic recognition of her weaknesses in a public setting, she appeared ready to consider alternatives to her initial all-or-nothing approach. I forwarded the message to Naomi with a simple note. The public forum shifted something. Let's prepare a framework that protects Hartford's mission while providing Vanessa a dignified exit. Some battles were won through legal arguments or boardroom maneuvering. This one had advanced through the simple power of demonstrated expertise in a public setting, allowing stakeholders to see firsthand the substance behind Hartford's leadership and the vision guiding its future. The path to resolution was becoming clearer, not through compromise of Hartford's core principles, but through creating a structure that honored its scientific purpose while addressing the legitimate financial interests created by my father's will. The quarterly earnings call had not just informed investors about Hartford's performance, it had illuminated the fundamental values that would guide the company's path forward. The settlement meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning at the neutral territory of the Four Seasons Hotel. As I prepared, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. From the shocking will reading where my father had declared, "I wasn't worth a penny," through the court battle over the original charter provisions, to the public demonstration of pharmaceutical expertise that had finally shifted Vanessa's position. The past weeks had been exhausting, yet clarifying. What had begun as a fight for my rightful inheritance had evolved into something more fundamental, a battle for Hartford's scientific purpose and the patients who depended on our treatments. This perspective guided the settlement framework Naomi and I had developed, prioritizing Hartford's mission while acknowledging the legitimate financial interests created by my father's will. I arrived at the hotel's executive meeting room to find Vanessa already seated with Lawrence Blackwell and a financial advisor I didn't recognize. Board Chairman Patterson and Naomi joined me, along with Devin Wright, whose financial expertise would be essential for the discussions ahead. The atmosphere was notably different from our previous confrontation. Vanessa's usual performative confidence had been replaced by a more subdued, businesslike demeanor. The disastrous earnings call had apparently prompted genuine reassessment of her position. "Thank you for agreeing to resume discussions," Blackwell began once pleasantries had been exchanged. "My client recognizes that a negotiated resolution serves everyone's interests better than prolonged litigation." "We appreciate that perspective," Naomi replied. "Before we discuss specific terms, I want to clarify our core principles for any settlement. First, Hartford's rare disease focus and research continuity must be protected. Second, governance must align with the charter provisions requiring qualified leadership. And third, any financial arrangements must maintain the company's long-term stability." Blackwell nodded. "Those principles are reasonable, provided they accommodate my client's legitimate interest in realizing the financial value of her inheritance." This acknowledgement, focusing on financial value rather than operational control, represented a significant shift from Vanessa's initial all-or-nothing position. "We've prepared a comprehensive framework that addresses both governance and financial interests," I said, distributing copies of the proposal we had developed. "Rather than the simple share buyback previously discussed, we're proposing a more nuanced structure." The settlement framework included several interconnected elements. First, a corporate reorganization creating two classes of shares: voting shares with operational control rights and financial shares entitled to dividend streams but without governance authority. I would receive all voting shares, while Vanessa would hold financial shares representing her inheritance percentage. Second, a phased liquidity program allowing Vanessa to convert portions of her financial shares to cash over a 5-year period, ensuring she received fair value without undermining Hartford's capital structure. Third, establishment of the Howard Hartford Foundation, a patient advocacy organization funded by a percentage of Hartford's profits, with Vanessa serving as chairperson if she wished, creating a constructive role aligned with her interests and abilities. And finally, formal adoption of governance provisions requiring pharmaceutical experience for future Hartford leadership, ensuring the company's scientific mission would remain protected regardless of ownership changes. This approach preserves Hartford's operational integrity while honoring the financial value of Vanessa's inheritance, I explained. It also creates a structure where both Hartford sisters contribute to our father's legacy in ways aligned with our respective strengths. The proposal's balanced approach, addressing both governance imperatives and financial interests, seemed to resonate with Vanessa more than I had anticipated. As she reviewed the details, her expression shifted from skeptical to thoughtful. The Howard Hartford Foundation is an interesting element, she noted, looking up from the document. What exactly would it do? It would support patients with rare diseases through education, advocacy, and assistance programs, I explained. As chairperson, you would help shape its priorities and serve as its public representative, maintaining the Hartford family connection to the company's mission while focusing on areas aligned with your strengths in communication and relationship building. The foundation concept provided something neither of us had explicitly acknowledged was necessary: a dignified role for Vanessa that honored her position as Howard Hartford's daughter, without compromising the company's operations. It offered her visibility, social status, and meaningful purpose without requiring pharmaceutical expertise she didn't possess. As discussions progressed through the morning, focusing on financial valuations and implementation timelines, I observed a subtle shift in Vanessa's engagement. Rather than approaching the negotiation as a zero-sum competition, she began asking substantive questions about how various elements would function and what responsibilities she would hold in the new structure. During a break, as Naomi and Blackwell stepped out to consult with their respective teams on technical details, Vanessa and I found ourselves momentarily alone in the meeting room. The silence that fell between us carried the weight of our complicated history, childhood competitions, our father's uneven attention, and the recent inheritance battle that had exposed deeper family dynamics. "Why did you include the foundation?" Vanessa asked finally, her usual performative mask temporarily set aside. "You could have simply offered financial terms and kept everything else." The question revealed more vulnerability than she had shown throughout our conflict, a genuine curiosity about my intentions rather than automatic suspicion. "Because this isn't just about financial assets or corporate control," I replied honestly. "It's about what the Hartford name means and the legacy our family leaves. You're as much Howard Hartford's daughter as I am, with a legitimate role in shaping that legacy. Just not through pharmaceutical operations where specialized expertise is essential." For a moment, Vanessa seemed to consider this perspective, one that acknowledged her legitimate place in the family story while recognizing the different nature of our contributions. "The past few weeks have been educational," she admitted with uncharacteristic candor, "especially that earnings call. I still think Hartford could benefit from broader market perspectives, but I recognize the specialized knowledge required for the core business." This acknowledgement, however limited, represented significant evolution from her initial dismissal of the rare disease focus as complicated medical stuff, less valuable than consumer products. The foundation would benefit from exactly those broader perspectives, I noted. Patient advocacy organizations need diverse skills: fundraising, public relations, event planning, relationship building with policymakers. Your abilities would be genuinely valuable there. Before she could respond, our attorneys returned with revisions to the financial schedules. The conversation shifted back to technical details, but something had changed in the dynamic between us. Not reconciliation exactly, but perhaps the beginning of mutual recognition of our different but potentially complementary roles. By late afternoon, we had reached agreement on most major elements of the settlement. The remaining points involved implementation timelines and valuation methodologies, important details, but not fundamental obstacles to resolution. We scheduled a follow-up session to finalize these aspects, with both legal teams expressing confidence that a comprehensive agreement could be completed within the court's temporary order period. As the meeting concluded, Vanessa approached me directly rather than communicating through attorneys as she had previously done. The foundation would need an executive director with pharmaceutical knowledge, she observed. Someone who understands the science but can translate it for donors and policymakers. Dr. Kaplan's wife runs a similar organization for another condition, I replied. She might have recommendations. I'd appreciate that, Vanessa said with surprising sincerity. If I'm going to chair something with the Hartford name, I want it done properly. It was perhaps the first time in our adult lives that Vanessa had approached me as a potential ally rather than a competitor, seeking expertise rather than challenging it. While far from a complete transformation, it suggested the beginning of a more constructive relationship than we had managed in decades. The next 2 weeks involved intensive work finalizing settlement details, drafting legal documents, and preparing for implementation. Throughout this process, I kept the executive team and board fully informed, ensuring transparency about the emerging resolution and its implications for Hartford's future. The structure preserves everything essential about our research direction and patient commitment, I explained during a special board meeting to review the near-final agreement, while providing an orderly path for Vanessa to realize the financial value of her inheritance without disrupting operations. And the Howard Hartford Foundation creates meaningful separation between financial ownership and operational control, Patterson observed, preventing similar conflicts in the future, while maintaining family connection to the company's mission. The board unanimously endorsed the settlement approach, recognizing it as a solution that honored Hartford's scientific purpose while addressing the legitimate interests created by my father's will. Several directors specifically praised the foundation concept as a constructive innovation that transformed a binary conflict into a more nuanced resolution. On the final day of the court's temporary order period, we gathered in Judge Watkins's chambers to present our completed settlement agreement. The judge reviewed the documents carefully, paying particular attention to the governance provisions that would guide Hartford's future leadership. This is an uncommonly thoughtful resolution, he observed after completing his review. Most inheritance disputes involve simple division of assets. You've created a structure that honors the company's purpose while addressing both governance and financial interests. With the judge's approval, we signed the final documents, transforming what had begun as a bitter inheritance battle into a constructive reorganization that strengthened Hartford's governance while creating new avenues for patient support. As we left the courthouse, Vanessa paused on the steps where reporters had gathered for our initial hearing weeks earlier. The media presence was smaller this time, but still significant given the prominent family names involved. Ms. Hartford, can you comment on the settlement? Will you continue to challenge your sister's control of the company? Rather than diverging to separate vehicles as I had expected, Vanessa gestured for me to join her. It was a calculated moment and a genuine opportunity to present a united front that would benefit both Hartford Pharmaceuticals and the newly created foundation. My sister and I have reached a comprehensive agreement that serves the interests of Hartford Pharmaceuticals, its patients, and our family legacy, Vanessa announced with the polished delivery that had always been her strength. The settlement creates the Howard Hartford Foundation for Rare Disease Advocacy, which I will chair, while Rebecca continues leading the company's pharmaceutical operations. Her framing was masterful, positioning the outcome as a purposeful division of responsibilities rather than her retreat from operational control. It provided her the dignified narrative she needed while accurately representing the resolution we had reached. When a reporter asked if I had comments, I added, This resolution honors our father's legacy by ensuring Hartford Pharmaceuticals continues its commitment to treating conditions others have overlooked, while expanding that mission through the Foundation's advocacy work. Different roles, shared purpose. The brief joint statement accomplished what hours of legal language could not. It signaled to employees, partners, and patients that the disruption had ended and Hartford's mission would continue uninterrupted. The implementation of our settlement agreement unfolded over the following months with remarkable smoothness. The corporate reorganization establishing separate voting and financial shares proceeded as planned. The Howard Hartford Foundation was incorporated with an impressive initial board including several prominent patient advocates and healthcare policy experts recruited by Vanessa, demonstrating unexpected commitment to her new role. Most importantly, Hartford Pharmaceuticals returned to its central purpose, developing treatments for patients with rare diseases. The Westridge treatment received FDA approval, bringing new hope to thousands suffering from a previously untreatable neurological condition. The Novartis trial advanced to its final phase with promising interim results. Research teams, freed from governance uncertainty, pursued new compounds with renewed focus and creativity. 6 months after the settlement, I invited Aunt Vivian to tour our expanded research facilities. As we walked through laboratories where scientists worked on next-generation treatments, she shared memories of my grandfather's original vision for Hartford. Thomas believed pharmaceutical companies held a sacred trust, she recalled. The knowledge to develop treatments for suffering, people came with responsibility to use that knowledge for genuine human benefit, not just financial return. That's still our guiding principle, I replied, watching researchers carefully monitoring experiments that might someday transform patients' lives. Financial success enables the mission, but the mission itself is about the patients. We paused at a wall displaying photographs of people whose lives had been improved by Hartford treatments, a visual reminder of the human impact behind scientific achievements and business metrics. Your grandfather would be proud of what you've built here, Vivian said, studying the faces in the photographs. Not just the scientific success, but how you fought to protect the company's purpose when it was threatened. I had help, I acknowledged, thinking of the many allies who had stood with me throughout the battle. Naomi's legal guidance, the executive team's unwavering support, the board's recognition of Hartford's true value, and even my mother's quiet affirmation of my worth beyond my father's judgment. And what about Vanessa? Vivian asked. Has the foundation role been meaningful for her? More than I expected, I admitted. She's actually quite effective as an advocate. Last month she testified before a congressional committee on rare disease research funding, apparently quite compellingly. She understands how to communicate with non-specialists in ways researchers sometimes struggle with. This development had been perhaps the most surprising outcome of our settlement. Vanessa discovering genuine purpose in her foundation role, rather than treating it merely as a consolation prize. While our relationship remained complex and sometimes distant, we had established a functional coexistence built on recognition of our different contributions to the Hartford legacy. During a recent foundation event, Vanessa had even acknowledged the complementary nature of our roles, noting that Rebecca develops the treatments in the laboratory, while I ensure patients can access them through advocacy and education. It wasn't familial warmth exactly, but it represented significant evolution from her initial dismissal of Hartford's scientific mission. As Vivian and I completed our tour, we passed the memorial wall honoring my grandfather and father. Their portraits hung side by side, Thomas the scientist founder, Howard the business builder, each having shaped Hartford in different ways with different strengths and priorities. Every family business faces succession challenges, Vivian observed, studying the portraits. The truly successful ones find ways to honor their founding purpose while evolving with each generation's unique contributions. Her observation captured the essence of what we had ultimately achieved through the painful inheritance battle and subsequent settlement. Rather than simply transferring control from one generation to the next, we had created a structure that honored Hartford's scientific mission while accommodating different family members' strengths and interests. The pharmaceutical company would continue its focused work, developing treatments for underserved patient populations, guided by qualified leadership with relevant expertise. The foundation would expand Hartford's impact through advocacy, education, and policy work, leveraging different but complementary skills. And both entities would contribute to the legacy begun by Thomas Hartford decades earlier when he first committed to developing treatments because patients needed them, not because markets demanded them. My father's final insult, that I wasn't worth a penny, had triggered a journey that ultimately strengthened rather than weakened Hartford's fundamental purpose. The conflict had forced explicit articulation of the principles that would guide the company's future, creating governance, structures that would protect its mission beyond any individual's tenure. As I returned to my office after Vivian's visit, I found an unexpected delivery on my desk, a small wooden box with a note from my mother. Inside lay my grandfather's pocket watch, inscribed with his initials and the date he founded Hartford, Pharmaceuticals. The accompanying note read simply, "Thomas wanted you to have this. He recognized your worth long before anyone else." Howard knew it too, in his clearer moments. Some legacies transcend wills and legal documents. I placed the watch carefully on my desk beside the scale model of our new research facility. Together, they represented Hartford's journey, from my grandfather's founding vision through the tumultuous years of my father's leadership to the company it had become under my guidance. The inheritance battle had never truly been about money or control, but about purpose and values, about ensuring Hartford Pharmaceuticals remained true to its founding mission of developing treatments for those with few alternatives. That mission now stood stronger and better protected than before my father's will had triggered our conflict. Some resolutions simply divided assets or determined winners and losers. Ours had transformed Hartford itself, clarifying its governance, expanding its impact through the foundation, and ensuring its scientific purpose would guide its future, regardless of who held shares or sat in leadership positions. In the end, that was what truly mattered. Not that I had secured control or proven my worth, but that Hartford Pharmaceuticals would continue developing treatments that transformed patients' lives long after any of us were gone. That was the legacy worth fighting for, and the resolution we had achieved protected it for generations to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.